Secure your tinfoil hats, buckle down tight, and hold on loosely as we soar over the rocky tops of the La Platas on a rocky mountain high, get sucked into the vortex of the Four Corners, and settle down snugly at mile marker 420, which you could find in colorful Colorado. It is Saturday, July 3rd, Sunday, July 4th, for those of you across the pond and beyond. Welcome to We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. I'm so glad you could join us this evening. I'm your host, TessaTNT, and I hope you guys are having an awesome 4th of July weekend and that this week hasn't been too hard on you. I swear, it's been very hot, and in a lot of places where it generally isn't, we're having a heat wave. I feel bad for a lot of my Canadian friends up there. They're melting. All the box fans and the ACs are all sold, so they can no longer even purchase those unless they go looking online. If you're listening right now, you're listening live on Spreaker.com under We Are Paradox Media. You can also hear us live right now at KPNL Radio, which you can find at kpnl-db.com. You can also find us on Twitter, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, CastBox, Tumblr, YouTube, SoundCloud, TuneIn Radio, Deezer, Podcast Addict, as well as Podcast Chaser, and Facebook. Don't forget the Facebook. So tonight, I feel bad because we've had Psychic Chris Garcia booked for this date, but unfortunately, and fortunately, he has family coming over this weekend, so he was hoping that he could do a change of dates. So most likely, we won't be having him on again till this coming month. So I'm sorry, you guys. If you were looking forward to calling in to get a free reading from Psychic Chris Garcia, it will not be this evening. And you get to spend time with me. So I'm gonna imagine we're out camping, we're building a campfire, we're making s'mores. If you're not into the whole s'more thing, maybe you can make some hot chocolate with marshmallows, chill it down, and have a side of graham crackers. That's almost just as good. But I like to kind of imagine being around the campfire and telling ghost stories. But before we go there, there's a few things that have been going on in the world around us today. One of them being the building collapse in Surfside, Florida. So I'm sending out love, light, prayers, and strength to family members that are missing their lost loved ones on this 4th of July weekend. And I'm praying that more survivors are found, but at this point it's looking pretty dire. There are miracles that happen. You know, people have lived through things like this up to 15 days, and we're not quite there yet. I believe this happened last Friday, so a week and a day today, I believe, is when all that went down. But I don't know. I just pray everything goes as it should, that the storms stay at bay, and they're able to get the rubble cleared out, and hopefully find more survivors. If not, find closure for families that are out there just wondering where their family is. And then, finally, for us here in the Durango, Bayfield, Vicedo area, the Mark Redwine case is happening, and a lot of you that listen may know that I came out of the paranormal closet and started Four Corners Paranormal Investigations due to Dylan Redwine going missing. He was a friend of my daughter's at the time. She's now 21 and gonna make me a grandma. But he was 13 at the time, I believe. He just turned 13. And he was on a court-ordered visit to see his dad. He really didn't want to come. His plan was to go anywhere but his dad's house. So he had made plans with several friends to go see them. And then the friend that he was supposed to go and stay the night with, he told him he couldn't come. His friend asked why not, and he said, I don't know. And his friend asked, is it because of your dad? And he said, yeah. And then he said, well, I'll show up in the morning around 6:30 in the morning So leave the side door open for me or unlocked. And if you don't, and if you go somewhere else, I'm going to be texting and calling your ass all day. I believe it was shortly after that, nobody ever heard from him again. And I think it has a lot to do with, and this is just me personally, his dad being a psychopathic, narcissistic sociopath, as well as not having the same relationship he did with Dylan before, because not too long before all of this went down, Dylan found some pictures of his dad wearing makeup, women's underwear, also wearing diapers that were soiled and leaking, and you might want to cover your ears for this part, eating shit out of said diapers. So Dylan found these pictures. Dylan never looked at his dad the same. Dylan did not want to be around his dad after finding these pictures on his laptop. I think another reason that Mark took Dylan's life is due to the fact that, you know, he had lost Elaine and his boys. This was his second divorce, and the only way he knew that he could continue to hurt Elaine was to take her baby, and that's what he did. And yeah, he didn't help look for him, not once. He did actually one time, but that was when the search was far from Vallecito and over on Florida Road. So he went on that search, but you couldn't get him out of his house otherwise, unless, of course, he was up dumping a body or getting rid of other evidence. So we're on week 2 of this case. There's been a lot of witnesses come forward, whether it's FBI, CBI, Sheriff's Office, Marshal's Office, friends of Dylan's, family of Dylan's, as well as his very own mother and his brother. We've had forensics specialists come in, and we've seen lots of things, including Dylan's remains, his bones. And they spent quite a lot of time talking about that yesterday and today, as far as part of his body was found on one part of the mountain, and then his head was found quite a ways on the other side of the mountain, and there were sharp-edged tool marks on his skull, and fractures, and of course animals scavenging on said remains. But yeah, I'm pretty sure, being that Dylan was killed by blunt force trauma to the head, that his dad separated his head and threw it on another side of the mountain. A very sad, horrific story. I don't know how anyone could do anything but love their children, but like they say, it takes all kinds to make the world go round. So yeah, it's been a very, very draining last 2 weeks. This week especially, all I wanted to do was sleep. But we've been waiting for this for 9 years now, almost 10 years. So we're just happy to be here and be on the road to justice for Dylan. What else is going on? No fireworks this year. Can you believe it? So, Durango, Bayfield, I'm not sure about Vallecito. I still have to look that up. But they will not be doing fireworks, so we could go to Farmington, New Mexico, I heard. Or somebody said Pagosa Springs was doing fireworks. Like I said, I want to check Vallecito because it's so pretty to see the fireworks up there reflecting off the lake. And Middle Mountain, I was married on Middle Mountain prior to Dylan Redwine being dumped there, and so Vallecito is a very special place for me. Like, that's where I met my other half. That's where I got married, up on that mountain there. Second year we did it in a church because my dad was like, you know, it's really great you got married and all, but it would have been nice if you would have done it in a church. So the very next year we did it in the church there, and yeah, My husband is in a band, and I know a lot of bands aren't playing these days, including this one, but they used to spend a lot of time up there at Virginia's and the Buffalo Gap, and these different restaurants have changed hands a lot in the recent past. But yeah, they played a lot of gigs up there. We've done a lot of camping up there, a lot of searching of Middle Mountain up there, paranormal investigations up there. It's a very beautiful place. So if you guys ever come to this area, definitely check out Vallecito. It is like a little piece of heaven on earth. Let me see, is there anything else? I already talked about the heat wave. People are melting. Unfortunately, when we have times like this and people aren't prepared because they are in cooler climate areas, people, especially the elderly or people that are sick and aren't prepared for this, they don't have ACs, they don't have box fans and things like that going on, they do succumb to the elements. So I'm sending out love and light and hope and prayers and strength to those of you out there that are still dealing with this heat wave. It's insane. And according to meteorologists, it's not going to get any better anytime soon. I can't really think of anything else off the top of my head going on in my neck of the woods that I'd like to talk about. It's fire season, so perhaps that's why a lot of places aren't doing fireworks. I know there's a lot of areas in Canada. Dave Scott, I hope you guys make it through. I know you guys are in an area where you seem to get lots of fires every year. Luckily, we don't have any here yet, knock on wood. But yeah, you guys, be careful with your cigarette butts, fireworks, if you do get sparklers or little ground chasers or things like that, bottle rockets, Roman candles. Man, no, I got an inkling to go hit a fireworks stand. I'm gonna have to go to New Mexico. But yeah, fireworks, a number one thing for me during this time of year. I'm really gonna miss it. So let's see. I have a story here that I had pulled up. Of course, I have the book I generally read from, and I could read from that and then get to these other stories. And I think I might do that just to kind of stay on schedule of how I've done things in the past when I do a show on my own, all by my lonesome. And I'm sure there might have been somebody out there that would have liked to do a show with me, but I like doing this sometimes. Sometimes I like to be on my own. But I'm not alone because I have you guys. So this book that we've been reading from in the past, and I do promise later on I'll get to some spookier ghost stories, but this one's called Bizarre Colorado, A Legacy of Unusual Events and People by Kenneth Jessen. And we're on a page 196, you guys. This one's called The Man with the Golden Leg. When Orville Harrington was a boy, a gun explosion during a hunting trip injured his hip and permanently damaged the nerves in his leg. As Harrington grew older, the nerve damage caused him a great deal of pain. He had 3 toes amputated, then at the age of 42, he was forced to have his foot and the lower portion of his leg removed. Harrington learned to get around on an artificial leg, but it was a turning point in his life. Man, I hope I'm not snagging this bad the whole time. So Orville attended the Colorado School of Mines, not mimes, but mines, in Colorado, and in 1898 graduated with a degree in mining engineering. During his years as a student, he became a class leader and secretary-treasurer of the Alumni Association. He also managed and edited the school magazine. Harrington was active in a fraternity and maintained good grades. His injury caused him to limp, and after graduation he was unable to find a job in his field of mining engineering. Hampered by his handicap, he was denied the higher-paying engineering jobs. Orville Harrington ended up working the swing shift for $4 a day at the Denver Mint. Just as Orville finished his shift on a Wednesday evening in February 1920, Roland Goddard walked over to him. Harrington looked at the stranger and said, "I don't believe I remember you." "That is unfortunate," replied Goddard. "I am Mr. Goddard of the United States Secret Service. Perhaps you will have an opportunity to know me better in the near future." At once Orville knew the game was up, breathed a deep sigh, and hung his head in shame. Goddard escorted Orville back into the Mint and charged him with embezzlement. The Secret Service spent months trying to figure out how over 80,000 in gold bars was stolen right under their noses. It was the watchful eye of a Secret Service agent that broke the case. Harrington's frequent trips to his backyard with a spade gave him away. After Orville filled a hole in his basement floor with gold bars, he buried them along the sidewalk in his backyard. Finally, agents planted a piece of gold valued at $1,400 near Harrington's workstation just before his shift began. Sometime during the evening, the gold vanished, and when Harrington was searched, it turned up in his vest pocket. The guards never suspected Harrington was carrying the heavy bars because of his awkward limp. Harrington used a secret compartment in his artificial leg to take most of the gold from the Mint. The gold was in the form of 7 inches by 3.5 inches by 1 inch. Nodes created during the gold refining process. The heavy bars easily were inserted undetected through a slot in his artificial leg. In all, he took 53 gold bars from the Mint. Ultimately, Orville planned to take the gold to an abandoned mine in the Cripple Creek area, melt it, and combine it with low-grade ore. His next step was to sell the ore back to the Denver Mint as a concentrate. Orville Harrington and his wife lived a quiet life in a home they had built. They raised fruit trees, vegetables, and flowers on an adjoining lot and had 2 children. When news of Orville's arrest was given to Mrs. Harrington, she was shocked. On May 12, 1920, at the age of 43, Orville Harrington pleaded guilty to embezzlement and was sentenced to 10 years at the federal penitentiary in Leavenworth, Kansas. He was paroled 3.5 years later. He returned to work for the city of Denver, supervising street paving crews. At the age of 50, Harrington quit his job and left his wife and children. Mrs. Harrington was left penniless and had to rent her home. She was forced to live with her children in the chicken coop in the backyard. Eventually, she decided to turn her children over to an orphanage and work as a governess. Orville Harrington, the man with the golden leg, died at the home of his sister in New York years later. What a joke! And I can't believe that the city of Denver actually hired his ass back. Jeez, oh Pete. You'd think after embezzling all that gold. But he was in charge of the paving crew, so I guess that wasn't the best outcome for him. But to leave your kids and your wife like that, and that was their house, so was she renting the house from him? She should have been able to stay there for free, and then ending up in the chicken coop in the backyard? Holy shnikes. This one's called Central City's Submarine. It is preposterous to believe that Colorado would be the site for the development of a submarine. And even harder to believe is that high in the mountains, far removed from any substantial body of water in either size or depth, that this would be where such a development took place. Nevertheless, on an autumn afternoon in 1898, Rufus T. Owens of Central City launched a submarine into Missouri Lake at an elevation of 8,500 feet. Submarines began to appear during the Civil War, and during the final 2 decades of the 19th century, a number of submarine designs were proposed by a variety of inventors. This activity may have sparked the interest of Rufus T. Owens, and in 1896, Owens began his attempt to design such a craft. He was an engineer and was known for his design of water distribution systems for both Central City and Black Hawk. The same year, the U.S. was at war with Spain over the sovereignty of Cuba, which was highlighted by the naval battle of Manila Bay. The U.S. considered submarines to be a potentially effective way of defending its coastline against a potential Spanish invasion. Rufus named his small undersea craft the Nautilus after Jules Verne's fictitious vessel. He hired a pair of Central City contractors to do the actual construction, but kept the work a secret. Owens' craft, built in a small shed in Central City, was 19 feet long and 5 feet tall at its center. It was constructed using a wood frame made of hand-hewn, whipsawed lumber held together by handmade square nails. After completion of the frame, the exterior was covered with irregular-sized sheets of iron, carefully soldered at the seams to create a seaworthy craft. On the day of the launch, Owens hired the owner of a local livery company to use a flatbed wagon to haul the Nautilus to Missouri Lake 3 miles north of Black Hawk. This was the closest body of water to Central City. At first, Owens climbed into his craft for its first untested dive. His friends talked him out of this as being far too dangerous, and he decided instead that the craft could be effectively tested using rocks as ballast. The Nautilus was pushed out into Missouri Lake for her maiden voyage and immediately sank to the bottom. Possibly out of embarrassment, Rufus T. Owens left Central City within a year, never to be seen again by local residents. Owens showed no interest in retrieving his Nautilus from the floor of the small lake. Within 2 years, the U.S. Navy launched its first successful submarine, the Holland. The existence of the Central City submarine grew more doubtful as time obscured its details. This was combined with the fact that few had actually witnessed the launching, and local newspapers had not recorded the event. During the winter, a surprised ice skater might look down and spot the craft laying on its side a dozen feet below the surface of Missouri Lake. The Chain O' Mines Company partially drained Missouri Lake during the 1930s, and the Nautilus was completely exposed, thus confirming its existence. Its square hatch was stolen by a souvenir hunter. After the lake was refilled, the public soon forgot about the ship. During World War II, submarine warfare was in the spotlight, and interest in the Central City submarine was renewed. One of the few witnesses to the construction of the Nautilus, Fred DeMandel, decided to locate and retrieve Owens' ship. As the end of 1943 approached, DeMandel got permission to search the lake by sawing holes in the ice in the general area where the ship was believed to rest. On January 11, 1944, after sawing more than 100 holes and by using a line with a lead sinker, DeMandel finally found the Nautilus. He confirmed his find using a glass-bottomed bucket to peer into the water. The foreman of the local trucking company was hired to raise the vessel using a winch. A large hole was cut in the ice above the Nautilus, and a steel tripod was erected over the hole. A chain was run through the tripod to the winch. On January 25th, the school in Central City was closed along with the courthouse and many businesses to witness the raising of the Nautilus. By the time the submarine was hoisted to the surface, 300 spectators were on hand, and the band from Central City High School played Columbia, the Gem of the Ocean. After the craft dried out, it was put on public display at DeMandel's Central Gold Mine and Museum. It was eventually sold and placed in yet another museum. William C. Russell, Jr., publisher of the Central City Register Call, purchased the craft and placed it in a warehouse where it rests today. Rufus T. Owens built his submarine in secrecy, leaving many unanswered questions. The Navy was searching for a practical design at the time, but did Rufus intend to submit his design? When the submarine was raised, no propulsion system or steering mechanism could be found. The ballast weighed around 1,500 pounds, somewhat excessive for a first dive. Maybe the entire project was nothing more than a whim. So there are a couple pictures of this thing, and yeah, I'm glad they talked him out of not doing it. So here's a picture of people on the ice and the submarine being hoisted out, and it said, lifted from the bottom of the Missouri Lake near Central City in 1944, the Nautilus is raised to the surface. It had been sitting on the bottom of this lake since it was launched in 1898. The Rocky Mountain News jokingly termed this the longest dive in history. You guys, you're so funny. Where do you come up with this stuff? And then here we have another picture, and this thing looks like a torpedo. If there was color, maybe you could call it the Yellow Submarine. But it says Central City's submarine is housed in a Gilpin County warehouse. The craft lacked any propulsion system or steering mechanism, leading to speculation that the project was nothing more than a whim on the part of its inventor, Rufus T. Owens. Ooh, for those of you out there that like Bigfoot, you might like this story. Colorado's Ape Man. Let me grab a little sippy poo before we continue on with this amazing story. Sheriff Richards from Fairplay was acting on complaints from local ranchers in the isolated Black Mountain area of South Park. He was told a crazy man was shackled like an animal in a lonely cabin on the 1,200-acre Beeler Cattle Ranch. Richards and 3 officers were sent to investigate the rumors on August 20th, 1928. When the law officers arrived, Mrs. Beeler was sitting on the porch of the ranch house. Her 2 dogs went into a barking frenzy as the men approached. The officers spotted the log cabin located near the ranch house. They hurried over to the old structure and cautiously peered in through its small window. In the darkness, they could see a human form only by the glistening white of his eyes. Sheriff Richards realized that the stories of a wild man were true. He pried the padlock off the door, and as the door swung open, the officers stepped into the cabin. The sun hurt the wild man's eyes after a dozen years of living in darkness. His fang-like teeth glittered as Colorado's ape man, Harry Beeler, blinked at the sun. He stared from beneath shaggy, unkempt eyebrows. His matted beard reached his abdomen, covered only part of his naked body. The leather belt around his waist was connected to one of the stout chains, and the other end was attached to the cabin wall. A second chain was attached to a leather band around his left ankle. The other end was also attached to a cabin wall. Harry Beeler sprang at the strangers with a cry like a dog's bark. The chains on the cabin wall stretched tight and abruptly jerked Beeler off his feet. He got up growling and grinding his teeth at the men. The chains prevented him from moving more than 3 or 4 feet. In the cabin was a makeshift bed. The floor was piled deep with human waste, and the odor was sickening. Insects scurried about in all directions. A tin can on the floor was used for food. The 70-year-old Mrs. Beeler stood by the cabin and remarked, "He was so bad I couldn't get near him to touch him. He hasn't had a bath in 12 years since we got him back from the insane asylum where they put him after they removed him from the penitentiary. We got him out through Governor Carlson. I promised to take good care of him. I did the best I could." She continued her story of how Harry didn't even recognize his father. He was so wild that he had to be watched every minute. The only practical thing left for the family was to chain Harry to the wall in the cabin. Sheriff Richards, upon seeing the tragedy etched on the old woman's face, nodded kindly. The sheriff and his deputies rushed Harry Bueller from 3 sides. The insane man fought like a wild animal. Finally, the officers were able to handcuff Bueller, and they threw a blanket over him. "He hasn't had a stitch of clothes on him for 12 years, Mrs. Bueller related to the officers, but every night I went out after he went to sleep and threw a blanket over him. Harry is a good boy, Sheriff, and I love him. Harry was a fine-looking boy. Any mother would have loved him then in the old days, but who but a mother could love him now as he is today? I don't want them to take him away from me. It would be better if we were both dead, but I don't want Harry to die." Harry and his aging mother were taken in the sheriff's car to Fairplay. It was the first time in years Mrs. Bueller had been in an automobile. They put Harry in a cell, and Mrs. Bueller was given a room in the new Fairplay Hotel. News of what the media called an ape man spread through Park County. Ranchers and residents came from all over to see Harry Bueller. The sheriff tried his best to protect the Buellers from the public and the media. The next morning, however, people stared through the cell bars at the poor man, and Harry stared back. Then he dashed at the bars like a caged lion. The blanket that Sheriff Richards used to cover him was torn to shreds. Outside, on the main street of Fairplay, Mrs. Bueller protested the way her son was treated. "They won't treat Harry right in the insane asylum," she told whoever listened. "They won't feed him what he likes. They won't cover him at night. They'll just let him die. And while he might be better off dead, I don't want him to die." Mrs. Beulah Bueller Evans, Mrs. Bueller's daughter, died just a week before in a Salida hospital. Her daughter was known for her books of mounted Colorado wildflowers that sold all over the United States. Since Mrs. Bueller passed away years before, Beulah's death left Mrs. Bueller alone to care for her maniac son. On August 24, 1928, Harry Bueller, age 45, was placed in the insane asylum in Pueblo after a brief sanity hearing in Fairplay. First he was bathed, shaved, and clothed. He was then put in a bed in a private room for observation. Mrs. Bueller lamented, "I'm alone now. I'm going back to the ranch to die. I won't live long, and neither will Harry." The tragic story of Harry Bueller began in 1914, when he was arrested for stealing and butchering a steer belonging to a Cannon City rancher. After bond was posted, Bueller disappeared. Harry was eventually located in Buffalo, New York, through letters he had written home. After Harry was returned to Colorado, he stood trial. The sheriff told reporters he believed Harry Bueller was innocent and was framed by local ranchers. Harry, nevertheless, was found guilty and sentenced to a term of 2 to 5 years in the penitentiary. After serving a year, Bueller went insane. In 1916, his parents obtained Harry's release to their custody, and this was the last time Harry Bueller was seen for a dozen years. In 1918, Harry's father, Joseph Bueller, died in a South Park cattle war, leaving Harry's care up to Mrs. Bueller and her daughter. After Harry's return to the insane asylum in 1928, Mrs. Bueller moved to Pueblo to be close to her son. On May 3, 1934, accompanied by a hospital guard, Harry was escorted to his mother's room in a Pueblo hospital. No light of reason could be seen in his eyes as he looked at the pitiful figure of his mother lying on her bed. Drawing his head close to her lips, she whispered all her love to him, closed her eyes, and passed away. Harry Bueller died at the age of 60 in 1943 in the insane asylum, bringing to a close this tragic story of Colorado's ape men. And there is an original picture of him, and he does look quite a bit like a Bigfoot, but you can tell he's human. And it's a picture that says, the August 22nd, 1928 front page of the Denver Post shows Mrs. Joseph Bueller and her insane son Harry the day he was released from a dozen years of confinement in a cabin on the Bueller Ranch in South Park. Poor feller. Trying to see where his mom's at. I could see 3 officers. Maybe that's her in the corner of the picture. That could be her arm. Who knows? That could be Mrs. Bueller's arm. Poor Maja. Here's another picture of her. Mrs. Joseph Beeler kept her insane son chained to the wall of the cabin for a dozen years before he was rescued by local authorities. And then there's also a nice little map here that shows Fairplay, Middle Fork South Platte River, Horseshoe Gulch Road. Looks like Interstate 285, Black Mountain, Beeler Ranch, Round Hill, South Fork South Platte River, Weston Pass Road. And it was drawn by the author of this book, Mr. Kenneth Jessen. Oh my, this one might just get your cockles. This one is called Prunes. Who doesn't like a good prune? Halfway up Fairplay's Main Street stands a curious monument made of dull gray cement adorned with ore samples from many of the mines in Fairplay, Alma area. Etched in the cement is the following expression of respect to one particular borough called Prunes. It reads, Prunes, a borough, 1867 to 1930, Fairplay, Alma. Wow. Holy shnikes. That mule lived a long time. All mines in this district. Expressed in the simple inscription is the heartfelt praise to the shaggy little servant of Colorado. Ripley, in his Ripley's Believe It or Not syndicated cartoon, made Prunes and his monument famous. Prunes was also featured in 1943 on the radio version of Death Valley Days. The last mine where Prunes worked was at the Hawking Mine in Mosquito Gulch. Prunes became the miner's pet, shuffling back and forth with ore cars in the dark, damp passages. Superintendent Harry Radford maintained that Prunes was his top jackass. When Prunes became too old, his owner, Rube Sherwood, freed the jack of his collar and traces, then retired him to roam in the sunlight at will. When Rube was 12, he ran away from home, and after a trip in a covered wagon, ended up hunting with Buffalo Bill. After wandering around the West, Rube settled in the Alma Fairplay mining district. For almost 5 decades, Rube owned Prunes and boasted that Prunes worked every mine of any consequence in the district at one time or another. After Rube pensioned his faithful jack, the animal spent its final years making the rounds of Alma's back doors to beg for food. Flapjacks fried in sow belly grease made old Prunes hee-haw with delight. Residents eagerly gave the old jack food. As the animal approached his 60s, his health began to fail. Well, I wonder why. Jeez, oh Pete. Sow belly grease, like, that can't be good for the poor jack's heart. An examination of his mouth revealed that Prunes was losing his teeth along with his ability to eat. A blizzard struck Alma in 1930 and the snow drifted deep. The temperature plunged below zero and Prunes took refuge in an old shed. During the blizzard, the door blew shut, and a snowdrift prevented the old burro from pushing the door open. Residents noticed that the burro was not making his usual sounds. After searching, they found Prunes half-starved in the shed, weak in the legs and unable to walk. He was showered with food and affection, but did not recover from his exposure to the blizzard. Poor Prunes. The miners met in May of 1930 in Alma to decide what to do about the suffering animal. It was a difficult decision, and the miners elected to put an end to the suffering of their little long-eared friend. Prunes was shot as some of the old-timers, including Rube, wept. His little gray carcass was discarded in a local garbage dump. Okay, so you're gonna sit there and cry and weep over this jackass, this mule, but you're not even gonna give him a proper burial? You're just gonna throw him in the freaking dump? Oh my gosh. A Fairplay cafe owner, with the help of other willing admirers, dug a grave in Fairplay's Main Street, and here they deposited the remains of Prunes. Over the grave, the miners in the area erected the unique cement monument studded with ore samples from the mines Prunes had worked. Never before had an animal been so honored by a Colorado mining town. Columnist Arthur Brisbane wrote this about Prunes. An old donkey that worked in Colorado mines so long that few could remember when he started his dead last. He worked until he could not work any more or even eat. They shot him. Now he is to be honored with a memorial built of ore samples from all the mines in which he worked. A touching picture, it will be appreciated by many a two-legged worker, including white-collar men. They are less fortunate than the old mine bureau. Nobody builds a monument to them, and nobody shoots them when they can no longer earn a living. They are turned adrift. Rube Sherwood composed a long poem titled Me and Prunes, which begins, So poor old Prunes had cashed in. Too bad, still in a way. I'm glad the old boy's eased off and calling it a day. I'm going to miss him scandalous. The world won't seem the same, not having him a-standin' here, hee-hawin' in the game. A year later, on August 23, 1931, at the age of 82, Rube Sherwood died in the Fairplay Hospital. On his deathbed, he realized he was on his last trail. He asked to be cremated and have his ashes buried behind the monument under which the bones of his faithful burro were buried. The funeral was attended by about 500 people. A bronze plaque was added to the top of the monument. Back at the Hocking mine, Superintendent Harry Radford instructed his trammer, John Billingsley, to round up a replacement for old Prunes. The superintendent didn't care where Billingsley found his burro or how he trained the animal. The new Jack Billingsley found was a lady which he named Maudie. The two got along well, but the Jack was difficult to get moving while in her collar and traces. To solve this motivational problem, Billingsley pulled out his plug of beechnut. Few people knew that a jackass would chew tobacco when given the chance. The burro raised her nose a bit, nuzzled it, and bit off a piece. After that, it was beechnut for Maudie, or no muck was trammed out of the mine. It cost Billingsley a lot of plugs, but was worth the expense. After a while, Billingsley moved to another mine. One day, his old superintendent, Radford, met him near the mine and said, "Billingsley, ye got a right to quit and get another job, but ye ain't got no right to pack away your secret tramming tricks. Tell me how, in hell, ye ever got that bloody damned Jack back into that mine." Billingsley's response was simple. "It's beechnut, Harry. Not horseshoe nor star, but beechnut. Remember that." "And that," Harry Radford exclaimed. "The hell, and to think Prune's done it all these years without a chaw." There are a lot of funny stories about burros. For example, a newcomer to the mining regions came across a burro packing a wheelbarrow upside down on its back. The wheel and handles were in the air, and the box partially hid the body of the animal. The newcomer asked the owner, "My good man, can you tell me why the little donkey is tied to the wheelbarrow in that odd fashion?" The owner thought this was a stupid question that deserved a dumb reply. "I sure can, stranger. This here jackaxe has been acquired by old Walpay Huggins for house pet at the Bully Boy mine, and being as the animal is too delicate to walk all the way over them rough trails, the old man wheels him up hill, and at the summit just naturally turns him over on the other side so as the jackaxe can stand up on his feet. Yes, sir, it does come hard on old Wallapie, but it's mighty resting for the jackaxe." A burro's stubbornness and obedience to its master is legendary, and is illustrated in the story of a burro named Tom. An old prospector was riding Tom up in the hills, and the animal's rocking motion caused the old man to fall asleep. Suddenly, the animal stepped off into a canyon about 900 feet deep. This woke the old man, and he saw the bottom coming up fast as they fell through the air. He knew they would be killed instantly. Tom liked the old man and would do anything he asked. The old man waited, and when they had fallen to within 3 feet of the bottom, he yelled, "Whoa, Tom!" The burro stopped immediately, and the old man hopped off onto the canyon floor and helped lower Tom the rest of the way. Seriously? Talk about Looney Tunes. Okay, coyote, anyone? How do you stop midair? That is crazy. The most important aspect of a burro, at least in the view of mining men, is its load capacity. Exaggerated claims were often made as to how much weight these small animals could carry. The Colorado miner in Georgetown decided to settle this matter once and for all. It was reported that 21 men, women, and children gathered on a June day in 1873 in Georgetown's Main Street to see how much weight a burro could handle. An eyewitness noted that when 650 pounds were put on the burro's back, it began to wink vigorously. At the weight of 1,100 pounds, the animal began to shed tears. At a full load of 1 ton, its tail stopped wagging. At 3,200 pounds, the poor animal exploded. The noise was so loud that it knocked over 6 men and a baby. Town authorities were so frightened that they thought there was a fire and began to ring the fire bell. Oh my gosh, y'all better say prayers. Do you think that story's real? I don't know. Maybe burrows are full of dynamite. Maybe that's some good old TNT inside them little burrows. Make them explode under 3,200 pounds. just reading that. 3,200 pounds. The poor animal exploded. The noise was so loud that it knocked over 6 men and a baby. Could you imagine a sound that loud? It's almost deafening. This one's called Last Piece of Colorado. Conflicting territorial claims, changes in sovereignty, and inaccurate maps produced by no man's land unclaimed by the United States in the middle of Colorado. It all began with Christopher Columbus in 1492, followed by claims covering the New World, as it was known at that time by Spain and Portugal. Exploration by Dominguez, Escalante, and others strengthened Spain's claim on lands west of the Rio Grande River. The French claim of its Louisiana territory overlapped that of the Spanish. The French explorer La Salle claimed the entire Mississippi River drainage. The primary area of uncertainty was the border between the western edge of the Louisiana Territory and the eastern edge of the lands included in New Mexico. Since this area was inhabited only by Indians, no real effort was made to resolve the conflict. In 1762, France ceded its Louisiana Territory to Spain. After nearly 4 decades, Spain gave the land back to France. England, meanwhile, claimed all the land east of the Mississippi River, with the exception of Spanish-held Florida. The American Revolution in 1776 changed the sovereignty of England's claim. In 1803, the French sold the vast Louisiana Territory to the U.S., with its poorly defined boundaries. One thing was certain: the territory included the Mississippi River watershed to the Continental Divide and as far south as the future site of Salida. In 1819, the U.S. signed a treaty with Spain to set the western boundary of the U.S., contingent on the location of the headwaters of the Arkansas River near Leadville. A boundary line was drawn north to meet the latitude of 42 degrees, which was Spain's northern territorial limit. Before it reached this latitude, the line intersected the Continental Divide. This formed a pocket between the Louisiana Territory, ending at the Continental Divide on its western extreme, and Spain's eastern border, ending along a meridian between 106 degrees 9 minutes to 106 degrees 25 minutes. The border depended on where the headwaters of the Arkansas River were defined. Spain's territory in what is now Colorado traded hands to Mexico. In 1836, this territory was traded once again to Texas. I do declare. In 1850, it became part of the U.S., then became part of the state of Deseret, Utah Territory, only to become part of Colorado Territory in 1861. The pocket of land not included under treaty comprised an area roughly 70 miles by 30 miles, forming an irregular oval of about 1,300 square miles from Breckenridge north to Middle Park. On August 8, 1936, the Breckenridge, I keep going into Blazing Saddles, Breckenridge, Southern Widows. Okay, so the Breckenridge Women's Club sponsored a unique celebration to officially lay claim to this last piece of land. Colorado Governor Edward C. Johnson unfurled and hoisted the United States flag, followed by the Colorado flag. The governor said, "For that vast territory he, Napoleon, received $15 million, but this little oval of no man's land, considered so unimportant that it was overlooked entirely, has produced more than 4 times the total cost of the 14 states with which Napoleon was readily parted." It was sarcastically put by Robert Black III in his book Island in the Rockies that, assuming a permanent division between the U.S. and Spain, Fraser, Granby, and Hot Sulphur Springs would have found themselves in the United States. Troublesome and Kremlin would have appertained to the crown of Spain. The formalities of customs and immigration would have been conducted close to the site of Partial. So we have a little map here, and it's kind of ovalish. I could say it's a bit ovalish. Wow, I do know, like, so many different claims have been laid here because there are rumors of French and Spanish wars, Spanish Indian wars, French Indian wars, American Indian wars, so many different wars going on in this little state. So many people wanted it, so many people passed it around. What was wrong with that oval of land, I wonder? But it's such a beautiful state. If you guys ever come out, you gotta check out Colorado. So diverse. So this next one is called Monarch Pass, once named Vail Pass. Oh, now we're going to get all hoity-toity. So on that note, we're going to go to our first musical break. On this break, we have... Okay, first of all, I got to tell you how long this break is. So if you're not digging the music, you can come back in time to listen to the rest of the show. So this break is going to be 14 minutes and 50 seconds. We have Mystique featuring Beauty and the Beast with If I Slip, like that poor jackass. Then we have Mr. Brett Casey with Mr. Cellman. We have Mystique again with I Want It All. And then we have Miss Mocha T with Future Plan. And I think, let's see, do we have 4? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, only 4 songs on this break. You guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this musical break.
Yeah, okay. I want it all. Even if you're stepping out of bounds, keep ballin'. I want it all. Diamonds and cars. Building big yachts, close up the stars. Buying the bars. Own it is ours. I want it all. Big or small. No more of a downfall. I want it all. I want it all. I want it all. I could sign your baseball. Money making it rain fall on a big mall. Owning the whole block. Driving to the mailbox. Cruising in my yacht, I gotta get up out this box. I want it all. I always knew that I would be rich, don't doubt for a minute. Speaking to resistance, hoping and feeling to give away $1 million. Just be chilling in the tallest building. Say hello to the mission and vision with me. Hello. Watch cost about 150 Rolex diamond luxury sitting next to Movado model cockpit before the arrival. Lamborghini with bass high, I could hear it all. Sit back, sun roof up, is the stars. High performance cars, super saloon, exclusive rims spinning hard. Always wanted to build a park. Obstacles to enter, a lot more for the kids. Recreation centers, I want it all. Red bricks, cream coated, painted marble fountain as I pass. Walking the stone path, heated pool, home theater for all of my family. Wanna do it for my city. Can't wait to see the chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. I want it all. Diamonds and cars, building big yachts, close up the stars. Buying the bars, own it is ours. I want it all, big or small. No more of a downfall. I want it all. I want it all. I want it all. I could sign your baseball. Money making it rain fall on a big mall. Owning the whole block, driving to the mailbox. Cruising in my yacht, I gotta get up out this box. I want it all. I'm inside of a dungeon, life involves repercussions. Could the consequences leave me boxed up, feeling suction? How could this bad mistake have me thinking ways to escape? Catching the case, wanting it all has been replaced. Look at a cellmate face, I know they can relate. Trust in the soul, heck no, it's to stay safe. Up in the place where my food is cold on my plate. It ain't no breaks, it's a time to concentrate. Watching my back, got stabbed by too many snakes. Who times dragged against the bars is the rude away. Mind race, body cold, hard to embrace. The situation made me think, why did I miss the hate? And common sense of being solved in so many ways. During the problem thoughts, I forgot I want it all. Forgot I had a dream to rule it, forgot to remember that all my fans had a thought that I can have it all. I want it all, staring at the walls, walking down the halls, wait for my collect. Call supposed to be at a concert hall. Instead, I want it all behind bars. Can't reach for a star. It's a fear. I want it all. 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 Diamonds and cars, building big yards, close up the stars, buying the bars, own it is ours. I want it all, big or small, no more of a downfall. I want it all. Diamonds and cars, building big yards, close up the stars, buying the bars, own it is ours. I want it all, big or small, no more of a downfall. I want it all. I want it all, I want it all. I could sign your baseball. Money making it rain fall on a big mall. Owning the whole block, driving to the mailbox. Cruising in my yacht, I gotta get up out this bodice. I want it all. Mystique, 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 mystique.
Boca T, let's get it. Future plan is to get you, boy. You all that I think about when I get you. I'ma treat you right, keep you close to my heart. Future plan is to get you, boy. You all that I think about when I get you. I'ma treat you right, keep you close to my heart. Future plan is to get you, boy. You all that I think about when I get you. I'ma treat you right, keep you close to my heart. Future plan is to get you, boy. You all that I think about when I get you. I'ma treat you right, keep you close to my heart. How could you love a man who never been loved? How could you show him something he so used to lust? I know I'm young, but I know I can be the one. If he open up his eyes and know I'm the one he can trust. Support and good loving is all a nigga need. All that bullshit niggas give you is a test to see if you'll leave. And if you leave, you are not a strong queen. Cause a queen will stay still, pray and be there for her king. Future plan is to get you, boy. You all that I think about when I get you. I'ma treat you right, keep you close to my heart. Future plan is to get you, boy. You all that I think about when I get you. I'ma treat you right, keep you close to my heart. Future plan is to get you, boy. You all that I think about when I get you. I'ma treat you right, keep you close to my heart. Future plan is to get you, boy. You all that I think about when I get you. I'ma treat you right, keep you close to my heart. I love the way he carry himself. I love his swagger. He had me at happily ever after. No fairy tale, this man I really wanna capture. A peek at you, got my heart beating faster. No road runner, but you got my mind racing. still can call you up and don't know what to say. My friends might say I'm dumb, my friends might say I'm stupid. Then again, why take advice from single women? Future plan is to get you, boy. You all that I think about. When I get you, I'ma treat you right, keep you close to my heart. Future plan is to get you, boy. You all that I think about. When I get you, I'ma treat you right, keep you close to my heart. Future plan is to get you, boy. You all that I think about. When I get you, I'ma treat you right, keep you close to my heart. Future plan is to get you, boy. You all that I think about. When I get you, I'ma treat you right, keep you close to my heart. Let's create a kingdom and have a Prince Wednesday. Build an empire, a dream I desire. Like Candy Crush on the Monday, got butterflies feeling funny. Blunt out the blunt, can't get no higher. Like a fiend who needs sexual healing. Boy, bless me with that business. You're my teacher, you got my undivided attention. Boy, would you come my way and answer a simple question?
Spark so much fire, think I woke up the dragons. I'm the new beast, spitting apocalypse for a fantastic. Got the power from God, made the rest hard to breathe. I'm on the surface, flow so powerful, industry don't fit me. Spark so much fire, think I woke up the dragons. I'm a new beast, spitting apocalypse for a fantastic. Got the power from God, made the rest hard to breathe. I'm on the surface, flow so powerful, industry don't fit me. You people fire well, I'm the kind that made you inspire. Smoke detector can't take the battery, is what I require. I am led to put me out, you need a metal lid. Stop, drop, then roll to your nearest exit. Not the one to play, we'll make you go back and edit. Make you jump, double dutch, till your leg legs. Head nobbing with the flow, man, I need a helmet. I just screwed up these verses and got them pregnant. One of a kind, and chick could step to my comparison. F the world up with this, man, I should just marry it. My words are weapons, big as tools that can't fit in your kid. They sell it fake, hoping I'd rather kill your hope like ISIS. Still killing it, infinite, check the status, I'm getting the win. Froze the flows with multiple codes, my symbols grows, I'm cold as snow. I know the principles, and we feasting the beast with the dragon relief. When it happens, it show that I don't play though. Step into us will be so fatal. Spark so much fire, think I woke up the dragons. I'm the new beast, spitting apocalypse for a fantastic. Got the power from God, made the rest hard to breathe. I'm on the surface, flow so powerful, industry don't fit me. Spark so much fire, think I woke up the dragons. I'm a new beast, spitting apocalypse for a fantastic. Got the power from God, made the rest hard to breathe. I'm on the surface, flow so powerful, industry don't fit me.
Hey, it's swag. I done got back in my bag. I done had people laugh. I done seen people pass. I spaz like spaz. The garbage man and they trash. This of course I can't crash. This a race and I'm fast. I pass the fake and put all of it last. Dragon so I clash. I hide it all in the stash. We are diamonds, they are brass. I'm connected with no lag. She a spin 34 bag. That's my wife and I'm glad. Michael Myers with his stabs. Ali with his jabs. A scientist in the lab. JJ Watt in his past. The amigos with the dab. This is why I ride. And I got the nag. Spazzy roll the sack with Mystique in the back. Money tall like Shaq. Weapons like Iraq. I am cancer in a pack. The 9/11 attack. We don't know no slack. You can't hold us back. Rock and roll with that.
So much fire, think I woke up the dragons. I'm the new beast, spitting apocalypse for a fantastic. Got the power from God, made the rest hard to breathe. I'm on the surface, flow so powerful, industry don't fit me. Spark so much fire, think I woke up the dragons. I'm a new beast, spitting apocalypse for a fantastic. Got the power from God, made the rest hard to breathe. I'm on the surface, flow so powerful, industry don't fit me.
I don't know if I got all those songs in there. It feels like this break went by really fast. And I know Rampage was supposed to be second break. Very interesting. So next break, it'll just be a little different than I originally planned, but it should be about the same time. Weird. Okay, so as I said before we went on break, this next story is called Monarch Pass Once Named Vale Pass. Right now, I got Chris on the message. Okay, let me look at my calendar really quick. Gotta give him a date. What? Oh, nope. I only have August available. Sorry, brother. Sorry. I only have August. Alright. Doing a show right now. I will let you know later. I will get back to you. Hopefully I put all my words in this time. Back to you. Alright, so back to our story time. We're reading Bizarre Colorado, a legacy of unusual events and people by Mr. Kenneth Jessen. Monarch Pass, once named Vale Pass. So an article in the November 18th, 1939 issue of the Rocky Mountain News read, if you pass a certain pass, it possibly may come to pass to be Vale Pass, Monarch, a Gate Pass, or Monarch Pass, we pass. When Governor Edward Johnson earmarked $1.25 million for the construction of a new highway between Salida and Gunnison in 1937 over Marshall Pass, a controversy developed. Highway engineer Charles D. Bell opposed the route over Marshall Pass until other passes were analyzed. Opposition mounted against Bell's idea, and the U.S. 50 Highway Association officially condemned any route other than Marshall Pass. The association was headed by local businessmen in Salida and Montrose. In 1938, Governor Emmons ordered a survey of all possible routes between the two towns. The survey crews worked through the summer and fall crisscrossing the Continental Divide. From this data, a brand new route following Agate Creek was discovered about 2 miles south of the old Monarch Pass wagon road. The new route followed the old wagon road up to the town of Monarch, where it deviated over the new pass. The U.S. 50 Highway Association pointed out that Marshall Pass was 440 feet lower than the new Agate Creek route and was easier to keep clear in the winter. Charles D. Bell prevailed with facts and figures. The estimated cost of the Marshall Pass route was $1.77 million compared to $1.5 million for the new Monarch Agate Creek route. Also, Marshall Pass required 6,000 degrees of curvature versus only 4,394 for the new route. The sharpest curves were held to 16 degrees versus 30 degrees for Marshall Pass. The new route was nearly 2 miles shorter. The new highway was constructed and opened for travel. We got another nice little map here, so if you guys are interested, pick up this book. You can see all these pictures. It's amazing. This guy did a really good job. On November 19th, 1939, Highway Department crews immediately erected signs along the road naming the new route Vale Pass. At the summit, the official state sign read Vale Pass, altitude 11,329 feet, to honor Charles Ville for his years of service to the Highway Department. The name selected caused both indignation and amusement at the Capitol. In jest, the Rocky Mountain News stated, for the benefit of travelers along US 50 between Salida and Gunnison, it can be stated somewhat officially that the mountain pass between two communities is either Fell Pass or Monarch Agate Pass, or possibly just plain Monarch Pass. The travelers should not be confused by either road signs or highway maps, state officials said. It is certain that the pass bears one of the three names. A smear campaign was initiated by local residents. They smeared the Bell Pass signs with black paint. In an effort to settle the issue for their new Colorado highway maps, H.M. Gosha Company of Chicago wired Mr. Bell and the governor to determine what official name was to be given to the pass. The governor stated that while some commissioners had decided on a Vail name, the pass should be called Monarch Agate Pass until the matter was cleared up. Agate was dropped from the name and Monarch Pass went out. The old Vail Pass signs were removed. In December 1939, Eagle County commissioners came to the rescue of Charles D. Bell. The pass between 10 Mile Creek and Gore Creek was known as Low Divide Pass and was traversed by U.S. Highway 6. The commissioners suggested changing the name from Low Divide Pass to Vail Pass. The change was made official, and this route was selected for Interstate 70. Ironically, the Vail name is far more prominent now than the name of virtually any other pass in Colorado. Oh my goodness. Japan bombs Colorado farm. Very interesting. When one first learns that Japan bombed a Colorado farm near Fort Collins during World War II, a picture of a heavily loaded bomber flying low over the Rocky Mountains comes to mind. The bombardier squints through the bomb sight as the aircraft makes its run, but this was impossible with World War II technology, Japanese bombers, and the distance involved. Besides, such an event would have been in the history books. The Japanese did, in fact, bomb Colorado, but not using aircraft. A clever scheme of bomb-carrying balloons was part of an offensive to demoralize U.S. citizens. The Japanese released 9,300 of these weapons between November 1944 and April 1945. They counted on the jet stream to carry the balloons over the ocean to the Pacific Northeast, where it was hoped the bombs would set fire to our forests. The balloons were 30 feet in diameter and filled with hydrogen. They carried incendiary and high explosive bombs along with a timing device. It required 50 to 60 hours to travel over the Pacific Ocean to North America. To compensate for slow loss of hydrogen, a barometer triggered the release of sandbags during the course of the flight and kept the balloon within its cruising altitude of 30 to 38,000 feet. A battery, protected by antifreeze, was used to power the release circuits. After releasing 32 sandbags during the course of the flight, the altitude control device dropped the load of bombs. The same mechanism also activated slow-burning fuses that set off explosives on both the balloon and the altitude control device. This caused the balloon to self-destruct, producing a blinding flash in the sky as the 19,000 cubic feet of hydrogen ignited. The capacity of this weapon was limited to 70 pounds and was designed to be unseen until the bombs released and the balloon exploded. The Japanese hoped to psychologically terrorize the American public using this mysterious silent device that struck randomly without warning. It took almost 2 years to develop, and the weapon was designed and designated the Fugo, F-U-G-O. Denied conventional materials due to wartime demand, the Japanese builders turned to the nation's talent for making paper. They used laminated mulberry paper that withstood the cold of high-altitude flight across the ocean. The balloons were constructed in the homes of civilians, primarily high school girls, as they pasted the necessary 4 or 5 layers of paper together. The Japanese knew of the jet stream, and the November to April launch window was selected since the winds were strongest during this period. The one flaw in their thinking was that during these months, the forests in the Pacific Northwest were the least vulnerable to fires. Snow and rain kept the fire danger low. The launch process depended on good weather and light winds. The balloons were carefully inflated, and it was a dangerous job because of the explosive nature of hydrogen gas. Although they looked underinflated at launch time, when they reached jet stream altitude, the hydrogen expanded to fill the entire balloon. Of the 9,300 balloons released, the Japanese counted on 1,000 making it across the ocean, enough to inflict sufficient damage on the U.S. The Japanese also counted on the media providing detailed coverage of this unusual weapon, and panic spreading across the nation due to its mysterious nature. As the months passed after the launch, little news came back to Japan. There was mention in local newspapers of 2 balloon incidents in Montana and Wyoming in December 1944. Unknown to the Japanese, coverage was suppressed by a nationwide effort involving the cooperation of newspaper editors. Having launched over 9,000 balloons, the Japanese concluded that the Fugo effort had failed and discontinued further production of the weapon. A design flaw caused the batteries to fail in the cold, high altitude because the antifreeze solution was too weak. With no power to release the sandbags, the vast majority of balloons descended into the Pacific. Only a little more than 300 reached North America, hardly enough to be effective. Most of the surviving balloons landed in the targeted area of the Pacific Northwest. However, none of the bombs started major forest fires. Several landed farther downwind in Montana, the Dakotas, Canada, Wyoming, and Colorado. There were 3 confirmed balloon landings in Colorado, plus a number of sightings. The most spectacular incident happened on March 19, 1945, near Timnath. At about 2 p.m., a balloon was sighted over Casper, Wyoming, moving to the southeast. By 6 in the evening, the balloon appeared over Fort Collins, still traveling southeast. Many residents witnessed the balloon. At 7:12 p.m., a flash came from the weapon, followed by a bright ball of fire. Timnath farmer John Sweats and his 10-year-old son, Bill, were busy working on some machinery in a shed when they heard the explosion. When they went out, they saw a fireball in their newly cultivated field. Sparks flew into the air 10 to 15 feet. A crater measuring about 10 inches in diameter and 46 inches deep was burned into the ground. Black smoke rose from the crater and drifted across the field. By 7:30 p.m., a large number of onlookers from Fort Collins had arrived. After the danger had passed, tail fins were recovered from the remains of the 26-pound incendiary bomb. An exploded incendiary canister was found near the crater. A neighbor, Frank Richter, found an unexploded bomb the next day while harrowing his field. It was located a mile and a half from the Sweats farm. The weapon was a 10-pound incendiary. A month later, while driving his tractor, John Sweats hit a cavern left by yet another bomb, a high explosive type that apparently exploded underground. No additional bombs were discovered. The Timnath Fugo weapon performed the way it was designed, but it drifted well beyond the intended target area. Because news of the balloon and explosion was suppressed, the Japanese never found out about the Timnath incident during the course of the war. There were other confirmed balloon bombs in Colorado near Pagosa Springs. Hey, that's just right up the road here, about 30 minutes. Delta and Colburn. It was likely that other balloons landed in Colorado, but were not observed. This next story is called Elijah the Marooned Horse. Gordon Warren and Wallace Powell of Gunnison were flying over the high collegiate range near Buena Vista during the winter of 1956. They spotted a horse trapped on the ridge between Mount Harvard and Mount Yell, confined to an area about the size of a city block swept clear of snow by high winds. It was obvious to the pilots that the horse would perish unless given some fodder. Using a Piper Cub, the two Gunnison men began airdrops on the 12,800-foot ridge once every few days. Their drops were restricted to times when mountain weather was good. The horse seemed to understand that after the aircraft made an initial pass, it would return to make a drop. Once a bale of hay was delivered, the horse ran over and fed. The mayor of Gunnison, Ben Jorgensen, began paying for the hay and the cost of transportation. The plight of the marooned horse was brought to the attention of the Denver Post by the United Airline pilot Ray Schmidt. Schmidt brought in aerial photographs of the animal. George McWilliams, staff writer for the Post, named the horse Elijah after the biblical character who is fed by ravens when lost in the wilderness. Aww, that's cute. Newspapers all over the world published the story of Elijah and the valiant effort of winged Samaritans to keep the animal alive. Children mailed in their nickels and dimes to continue the airdrops. TV crews filmed the stranded animals. Centennial Racetrack started a fund for Elijah. Many donations were for $12, the cost of a bale of hay. Airline pilots even pointed out the location of the horse to their passengers. Elijah was the rugged, unpampered Western horse, soon became a national symbol of his four-legged kind. From a television news reporter, Bill and Art Turner of Buena Vista recognized the horse as one of their pack animals named Bugs. The Turners recalled that Bugs, aka Elijah, hated parked cars and women in skirts. He escaped from his mountain pasture the previous fall. The airdrops continued. Then in April, a Denver Post expedition, including staff writer George McWilliams, photographer Dean Conger, copy boy Irv Moss, and the horse's owners and ski patrol member Jody Grebe went into the mountains to reach Elijah and check on his condition. It was a long struggle beginning before dawn and lasting until late afternoon, but the Post team did reach Elijah. As they came up on the ridge, the Turners called to their animal and it walked over to them. They placed a rope halter on him and fed him a bag of oats. Elijah was in fine shape. Deep snowdrifts prevented the team from bringing Elijah down. Towards the end of May, the Turners climbed through the spring snow and led Elijah down from the mountains. They were forced to shovel a trail through the deep drifts. By the end of the first day, they had made it only part of the way down. They tied Elijah to a picket. When the Turners came back the following morning, Elijah had broken his picket rope and was found a mile back toward the saddle. The people in Buena Vista came out for a homecoming parade to welcome the hermit horse. Elijah was transported to Denver and became the center of attention at the opening of the quarter horse season at Centennial Racetrack. He raced another horse named Goliath and won. Elijah was led to the winner's circle and was presented with a red blanket bearing his name in white letters. Elijah was honored with a parade through downtown Denver, taken to a carnival at the University of Denver, and put on display outside the Denver Post building. Elijah was adopted as the official mascot for the Colorado Dude Ranchers Association. The tale of Elijah was written by Bill Hasakawa, executive news director for the Denver Post, and published in the Reader's Digest. The story appeared in a dozen languages worldwide. After all the publicity was over, Elijah was returned to his owners to continue his life as a pack animal for the hunters and tourists. During his last years, Elijah was free to roam in his chosen pastures during the winter months, high above the hustle and bustle of humans. In March 1971, Bill Turner came across Elijah, crippled and in poor condition. The 27-year-old horse was suffering from a broken leg and could not be moved from his high mountain pasture. Bill Turner did the humane thing and put a bullet into the indomitable old horse. He didn't notify the media at first because he figured Elijah had already had his share of publicity. Elijah's carcass was left in a cluster of rocks among the tall, majestic peaks. This great Colorado horse lives on, however, in the minds of those he touched. And there's some pictures, like I said before. You want to see these pictures? There's some really good pictures in this book. This guy did a really good job. Alright, so this one is Crash into Mount Sherman. To crash into the summit of a 14,036-foot peak during the winter and survive is amazing. This is just what happened to Orville Rosengren, his wife Lorraine, their son Jack, Chuck Budd, and pilot Jim Williamson. Rosengren operated a car rental agency in Aurora, Illinois, and raised quarter horses as a hobby. He planned to show some of his prize horses at the National Western Stock Show on January 13th through the 21st, 1967. Before the show, however, the Rosengrens and a friend, Chuck Budd, decided on a ski vacation in Aspen. They chartered a plane to take them from Denver to Aspen and took off the morning of January 4th. Pilot Jim Williamson originally reserved a supercharged aircraft from Clinton Aviation, but had to accept a normally aspirated Cessna twin-engine 310 because of a malfunction in the other aircraft. Williamson piloted the Cessna up through the clouds to 15,000 feet, but it wasn't long before he encountered a strong downdraft over South Park. The plane lost its lift and fluttered like a leaf toward the ground. After hitting a snowbank, it momentarily bounced back into the air and skidded about 40 yards. Chuck Budd was pitched into the aisle of the small aircraft, and Miss Rosengren's left arm was broken. No one seemed to be seriously injured. Williamson found that the radio was still working and called for help on every frequency. Finally, an Ozark Airlines pilot heard the SOS. A United Airlines training plane heard only clicks on the radio, and the pilot knew that the sound was from an aircraft with its battery about to go dead. Soon the only sound on the downed aircraft became that of the constant howling wind, and the only thing visible was the blowing snow on a high ridge just below the summit of Mount Sherman. The outside temperature registered at 15 below zero. The aircraft's cabin was intact, but the door was sprung, causing cold air to enter. The luggage was brought in from the wing storage compartment, and the Rosengrens began plugging the gaps in the door with clothing. The rest of the clothing was used around their feet. A bottle of scotch came in handy during the evening. When Cluck Bud's shoulder began to hurt, Williamson gave the arm a tug. There was a snap and the pain went away. The next morning, pilot Bob Greeno and his companion, Eldon Larson, took off from Glenwood Springs in a public service company helicopter. Their job was patrol the power lines in the more remote areas of Colorado. During the flight, they heard a call over the radio asking if there was a helicopter in the area, and responded. The downed Cessna was spotted by a search plane, and Greeno was able to fly over the ridge right to the site. He landed the helicopter a couple of 100 yards from the aircraft. The helicopter could only hold 2 passengers, so Larson stayed behind as the Rosengrens were airlifted to Leadville. Greeno refueled and headed back toward Mount Sherman. This time he couldn't land because of extremely high winds. Finally, he found an open area 1,000 feet below the first landing site and waited 30 minutes for Williamson, Rosengren's son, and Chuck Budd to descend to him. They all managed to squeeze in and were taken to Leadville just as a snow squall closed the area. Larson was now left alone as the weather grew worse. He knew there wasn't any chance for another attempt at landing. He was dressed only in street clothes and decided that his only chance for survival was to head down the mountain. He fell and slid down the slopes of the Mount Sherman. In the meantime, a rescue team made its way in a snowcat toward the base of the mountain. Larson was found and taken back to civilization with injuries and frostbite. This next one is making me hungry. This next one is called The Tomato Wars, and there's nothing I love more than a salted tomato. What may have been precipitated the Tomato Wars was a comment made to Taylor Adams, former owner of the Inn of the Black Wolf at Twin Lakes along Colorado Highway 82. A woman from Dallas looked at the natural beauty of Twin Lakes nestled next to Colorado's highest peak, Mount Elbert, and said, "This is a pretty area. It's a shame nobody's done anything with it." Taylor knew right then that she had to do something, not about developing the area, but about Texans who constantly try to dominate the economy, the roads, and the resorts. Many other Coloradans apparently felt the same way. As many as 500 have shown up at the Tomato Wars to plaster the Texans. Taylor, in fact, had a problem recruiting enough Texans to make the war worthwhile. Non-Texans are even pressed into service to help out by the momentarily charging their allegiance. It is not very desirable to be a Texan during the Tomato Wars. Coloradans historically outnumbered them by as much as 10-1. To start a war of this sort requires an unusual person with a great deal of imagination. Taylor fits this bill. She is an attractive lady with large brown eyes and short black hair. She probably stands all of 4'11". Well educated at Harvard, she was a clinical psychologist. She speaks with a slight hint of a Bostonian accent. Somehow, Taylor managed to escape the humdrum, workaday world for a forested piece of property along Lake Creek that she fondly calls Topawingo. Everyone who loves the out-of-doors would envy the beautiful view from her kitchen window of the stream with the dense forest coming down to the water's edge. Beyond the trees is a rugged mountain rising into the clear Colorado sky. Taylor has been fascinated with wolves since she was 18. Aw, she's cute! There's a little picture of her, Miss Taylor Adams. Well educated at Harvard and a former clinical psychologist, started the Tomato Wars in 1982 near Twin Lakes, Colorado. It began as a protest against Texans who constantly try to dominate the local economy and grew into an annual event. She is super cute. She reminds me of my mom. Oh my gosh. I'm going to have to take a picture of this and share a picture of her and then a picture of my mom on the after party. I'll try to do it on Facebook, but like I told a lot of people, I got put in Facebook jail, so I might not be able to. We'll see. So, Taylor has been fascinated with wolves since she was 18 and is a recognized authority on the subject. She lives in a mobile home surrounded by stout wire fences that form separate enclosures. In each enclosure is a pair of wolves. Most of her animals are mature and could easily injure an unsuspecting visitor. She cautions guests not to put their faces close to the wire fences and that only certain animals are safe to pet. Close up, wolves look even more formidable than their photographs. Their wild eyes, large front paws, powerful jaws, and muscular bodies automatically make one cautious when approaching one of the enclosures. After sunset, the wolves join their voices and serenade the stars with their mournful cry. It's a sound not often heard, and one that is not easily forgotten. The Tomato Wars began in 1982. The contest is held around the middle of September, off-season for area resorts. The rules are simple. Soldiers hit above the torso are considered dead and can return to the bar or watch from the sidelines. The battle against the Texans takes place on Saturday, and on Sunday there is a shootout to determine the overall winner from among all surviving contestants. Incidentally, the Colorado battle cry is, "Keep Colorado beautiful! Put a Texan on the bus." An army consists of a captain, 9 soldiers, and an MP. There is an entrance fee, and for the 1987 war, this was $375 per army. For this particular war, the winning army was awarded a free night at the Inn of the Black Wolf. The fee covers a t-shirt, a party Saturday night with a live band, plenty of beer, a second party Sunday afternoon, and plenty of tomatoes. Prizes are awarded for the girl with the best tomatoes, the Texan with the longest horn, and the most imaginative flag. Special prizes are given for the most inventive battle strategy, the best Colorado Texas joke, and the best costume. Mercenaries are encouraged to participate and are assigned to an army short of people. Colorado towns, bars, and even companies have sent organized armies to fight the Texans. Creative names such as Spot, Society for the Preservation of Overripe Tomatoes, Knights of the Round Tomato, and RIP, which is Rest in Paste, have been used by various groups over the years. Because it is important to identify members of each army in the field of combat, each Colorado army is given a different colored t-shirt. For ease of identification, the Texans wear either white or yellow. Some of the best strategy has included a Texan arriving by helicopter, a Coloradan arriving by parachute, and a peace march held by the dissenting army. In 1984, the inventive Texans moved into battle with a cardboard tank complete with a cannon that squirted tomato juice. The winning strategy over 1 year involved a pretty Texas gal. She began to undress within sight of male Colorado warriors. When the curious Coloradans advanced, they were ambushed from the trees in a hail of tomatoes. A half-dozen casualties resulted before the Coloradans retreated. During past wars, simply to survive, the vastly outnumbered Texans have employed elaborate strategies. They have built forts of plastic garbage bags and straw bales and dubbed the forts Tamalamo. The Texans located their forts on the south side of Lake Creek, and the flag for the Lone Star State was used to mark its location. The Tamalamo has typically been the scene of the most intense fighting. Incidentally, Lake Creek is temporarily renamed the Rio Grande for the sake of the Tomato Wars. Taylor conditions the ammunition by letting it freeze and thaw for several nights. This has a marked softening. During the more recent years, 5 tons were used, divided into 265 cases. Each army is typically given 3 to 4 cases, and some of the more successful armies are able to steal several more cases. To review a typical war, a bugle sounds at noon and the throwing begins. As the Coloradans charge across the Rio Grande, tomato missiles hit the water all around them, much like depth charges. In response to an all-out assault by the Coloradans, the Texans usually retreat quickly to their fort. They defend their fort by throwing tomatoes at a rapid pace. During some of the battles, the Colorado armies run out of ammunition and are forced back across the Rio Grande. Ultimately, however, the numerically superior Coloradans surround the Tamalamo, kill all the Texans, and bring down the Lone Star flag. This process usually takes about 2 hours. The hillsides are left running red with tomato juice, and the ground becomes littered with shreds of tomato skins that look like they came out of a blender. According to Taylor Adams, the Texans refer to their ammunition as tomaters, while the more sophisticated Colorado's people often use the term tomatos. During the heat of battle, tomatoes fly in all directions, are split in pieces by tree branches. The soldiers carry their ammunition in plastic grocery sacks strapped to their waists. Many of the participants come dressed in strange outfits and even blacken their faces. Some are intoxicated, which seems to aid in combat or lessen the agony of defeat. To be drunk, by the way, is technically against the rules. At times, there are close-range encounters between 2 people faced off only feet apart, throwing tomatoes at one another at a machine gun-like pace. Bobbing and weaving seems mandatory to stay in the game. The strategy of some warriors is to simply hide in the woods until the Texans are defeated and the armies are fighting among themselves. These warriors then come out of hiding and wipe out the remaining troops. The survivors from Saturday come to the finals the following day. The first year, the winner was determined by a game of musical chairs where one chair held an overripe tomato on its seat. During the following years, duels were fought at 20 yards. Finalists are not allowed to move their feet, and throwing continues until one of the two combatants gets plastered. Some years, protesters showed up dressed in outrageous costumes, carrying signs with "Hell no, we won't throw," and spouting slogans that tomatoes should be used for Bloody Marys, picante sauce, barbecue sauce, and other uses. The mock protesters chanted, "Make pace, not waste." Dressed in a Cuban-style general's outfit, a warrior known only as General Gamboa showed up at the 1986 war. He had cartridge belts containing Havana cigars. A female warrior dressed in a sheepskin outfit with a painted face held a shield high with the words "Tomato Warrior" painted on it. Maybe the best flag this year was from an army called Gypsum's Finest from Eagle, Colorado. It showed an eagle dropping tomato bombs on an armadillo. The battle zone has varied over the years. For the 1982 and 1983 encounters, the war zone was in a field south of the Inn of the Black Wolf. In 1984 and 85, the war zone was moved to the upper end of the lake, and from 86 on, the tomato wars were held on Taylor Adams' property along Lake Creek. I think we can get through this before our next break. We can do it. Okay, so Colorado's greatest bank robber. What irritated FBI agent Charles T. Evans about the so-called gentleman bandit was what happened on February 13th, 1987. I'm feeling a bit parched. I must partake of a puff and a drink. The bandit had already struck 40 other banks and just happened to pick 2 blocks from his Boulder office. Evans accepted the challenge of putting together the package that ultimately put an end to the gentleman bandit. In his research, Evans discovered that this bank robber started in Pennsylvania, then suddenly turned to Colorado. His first bank job was the Silverado Banking Center in Littleton. But every now and then, the robber returned to strike again in Pennsylvania. The gentleman bandit was easily identified by photographs taken by the cameras in the banks. The man they were after was a Tom Selleck look-alike and had a bushy mustache. In fact, a couple of girls in the local FBI office had a great photograph of his behind in jeans and thought he had a great derriere. On his full head of hair, he wore a blue baseball cap. He covered his eyes with sunglasses and carried an athletic bag for his loot. The problem was that he looked like any of 200 other guys. This bank robber was not at all a gentleman, but got the name the Gentleman Bandit during a Pennsylvania robbery. A little old lady offered him all the money in her purse during one of his holdups. He said that he didn't want her money, only the bank's money. The press got word of this and remarked that this was a gentlemanly way to do things. According to Evans, this guy was nothing more than a streetwise, smart-ass jerk. There's nothing gentlemanly about a fella who comes into a bank and points a loaded 9mm automatic in the face of innocent bank employees. Evans began his extensive research in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. He met with about 20 officers and spent 3 days brainstorming about what this fella was going to do next. They ended up with zip, zero, zilch, and nada. The task then was divided up between Evans and another agent. Evans took the robberies in the west and the other agent took those in the east. Slowly, they developed a modus operandi. The robber would leave his own vehicle somewhere near the bank, but well out of sight. He would walk to the bank, pull the stick up, and take a car belonging to a bank employee. He would drive it to his own car with the money, make the switch, and abandon the other car. This method was used for many robberies until one day he took a teller's car only to discover a big German Shepherd sitting on the front seat. He switched to leaving the bank on foot. Next, he began stealing a bicycle for transportation to and from the bank. After each robbery, the police found the bicycle several blocks away. The FBI began a program of newspaper ads describing this robber and invited people to call them. They received 4 or 5 calls a day that went something like, "My brother-in-law," or "My ex-boyfriend," or "My ex-husband is the guy you are looking for." The FBI spent a lot of time running down leads and found nothing. By that time, the gentleman bandit was up to 42 banks, and it was the spring of 1987. No progress was made in solving the case. Agent Evans struck upon the idea of compiling all the data from all the robberies and then trying to think like the robber. A questionnaire was developed and filled in for every robbery. The questionnaire included things like how many tellers there were in the bank, the size of the bank, the type of bank, the time of day, the day of the week, proximity to restaurants, highways, shopping centers, etc. The questionnaire even asked the name of the nearest fast food chain. The highways were classified into 2-lane and 4-lane, and the proximity to an exit was noted. A girl from the Boulder Police Department was brought in to enter all the data into a computer. Using this database, some interesting things surfaced. Every robbery was of a savings and loan with only one exception. The gentleman bandit also picked on banks in Colorado located along the Front Range from Fort Collins to Colorado Springs. A similar pattern was repeated in Pennsylvania, but only in a circular pattern. Almost all of the robberies were on Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, and mainly between 1 p.m. and 4 p.m. There were a couple of 5 p.m., several in the morning, and some on Saturday. Of the 44 robberies, 38 fit these times and days of the week. The banks were typically in or near a shop of the week. And the banks were typically in or near a shopping center with a fast food chain restaurant nearby. Evans felt that the robber used the restaurant to survey the bank before pulling the job. Agent Evans then realized that almost no robberies occurred in major towns, but rather that the concentration was in the suburbs. There was only one robbery in Denver, and it was a block and a half inside the city limits near Lakewood. Evans figured it was done by mistake. Why did the bandit pick on the outskirts of a major town? It had to do with the quick response of the police departments in major cities. Denver, for example, had this reputation, and the police didn't mind shooting bank robbers. The gentleman bandit only picked on branch banks, mainly Silverado, Empire Savings, and First Federal. He avoided Bank Western, possibly because of ununiformed security guards. There were approximately 2,000 branch banks along the Front Range, but eliminating the industrial banks, credit unions, and commercial banks dropped the number. The banks in Denver were also removed from the list, and the number dropped all the way to 200. This was still too many for the FBI to tackle. During a 2-week period, all 200 of these branches were visited. By selecting branch banks in shopping centers with 1 or 2 tellers, no security guard, and a fast food chain nearby, the number was cut to 22. Evans was gratified. He started with potentially 2,000 banks and reduced the number by almost a factor of 100. Next, he called a meeting of the 18 police departments covering the 22 branch banks. Evans made a presentation complete with slides and overheads. He got commitments from the police departments to place off-duty officers in these branch banks. Because of the manpower involved, they decided to concentrate only on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m., the most likely time for the gentleman bandit to strike. The next step was to approach the banks themselves. The cost to place an off-duty officer in a bank ran about $300 per branch per week. Because the case might remain unsolved another 6 months or even a year before the gentleman bandit was captured, the potential investment was substantial. To make matters worse, some of the banks had several branches in the list of 22. This was a time when savings and loan banks were not doing very well. Eventually, all of the bank presidents agreed to pay the officers. The branch bank personnel had to be trained. If a teller failed to react correctly, the entire plan could go sour and a teller could get killed. After several months, all of the banks got trained personnel. The plan wasn't to shoot the gentleman bandit, but to capture him alive. The tellers were instructed to turn over the money and let him escape. An off-duty officer was to follow on foot and when outside the bank, make the arrest, hopefully with help of a uniformed officer. Evans figured out how long it was between robberies based on the amount of previous robbery divided by the days to the next robbery. The bandits' take average was 383 per day. On July 9, 1987, the gentleman bandit got lucky and struck a bank in Aurora without getting caught. Just 2 weeks after the FBI had it all figured out. At the time, there were about 80 officers working at 22 branch banks from Fort Collins to Colorado Springs. Some were sitting in the parking lots and some were on rooftops with rifles. Because he didn't rob during the designated week, but 10 days later, he escaped capture. The police responded immediately, and because the bank was robbed on a Friday afternoon, were reasonably sure it was the gentleman bandit. The officer who arrived on the scene went directly to a nearby apartment complex and immediately found the escaped bicycle. Its wheels were practically still turning. The officer missed the bandit by seconds. October 7th, 1987 rolled around and everyone was ready. It was a Wednesday afternoon. Hump day! And at this point, the gentleman bandit had already hit 49 banks. Inside the Silverado Banking Center in Littleton was off-duty Denver police officer Edwin Morales. He was dressed like a banker and sat at a desk. The branch manager looked out of the window and saw a man coming toward the bank, riding a red bicycle. She recognized him immediately with his full head of hair, sunglasses, baseball cap, and athletic bag. She said, "That's him!" Morales got into a teller's position, but below the counter. The gentleman bandit walked through the door and announced that this was a robbery and asked the tellers to keep their hands where he could see them. He had his 9mm automatic in one hand ready to fire if necessary. Morales mentioned to the bank employees to get down, then raised up from behind the counter and told the robber to drop his gun. Morales had his gun ready to fire and pointed directly at the bandit. The gentleman bandit brought his gun up toward the officer and Morales fired twice. One round hit the bandit in the chest. He grimaced and doubled up and fell on the floor. After 3 years of investigation, it was over in seconds. The robber was identified as Melvin Dellinger. As Melvin Dellinger was going into surgery, he told the nurse, "I'm Mel Dellinger, and I robbed 50 banks." Later, he died, putting an end to his bizarre chapter in the history of West Bank robbers. Melvin Dellinger goes down in history as the third most active bank robber in the FBI's files and by far the most successful in Colorado history. In Dellinger's pocket was a note that explained who he was and went on to say, "My wife knew nothing about this. Please tell her I'm sorry. Thanks." On the note was his wife's phone number, his wife's name, and where his car was parked that day. It is obvious that he wrote a new note every time he committed a crime. Melvin Dellinger entered the Army directly out of high school and attended warrant officers training in Alabama. He was caught robbing a post PX and was discharged. He then went to college at Pennsylvania State University and eventually received a degree in journalism. In 1975, he robbed a bank in St. Louis and was caught in an attempted robbery in Florida in 1977. For that, he served in a federal penitentiary. After 4 years, he was released. He completed his parole in November of 1982, but began robbing banks again. Dellinger left his native state and moved to Denver in 1984. Dellinger lived a fairly normal life in Denver and was liked by his neighbors. He went to a local health club to stay in shape. He was friendly, but too lazy to work for a living. Dellinger and Elizabeth Zwinak rented a home on Elm Street in Denver. They weren't married when they started renting, but later Dellinger began to refer to Elizabeth as his wife. But what did he do with his money? He lived modestly. He paid his rent and bought food for himself and his wife. He kept his yard nice and lived a quiet life on South Elm. When he left on a bank robbing trip, he told his wife he was going on a business trip. His father was in the carpet business, and Melvin supposedly went on the road selling carpet for his dad. Neighbors simply believed he made his living this way. His real expenses, however, were those incurred in gambling, so much so that he was a preferred customer at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas. He also gambled at the casinos in New Jersey. The irony of this story is that the same bank he first robbed in Colorado was his last. And then, of course, here, Mr. Kenneth Jessen has some more pictures for us, and there's about 5 photos of the bank robber wearing different hats and different outfits. Bank camera photographs of Melvin Dellinger, Colorado's greatest bank robber. He was readily identified with his full head of hair, a baseball cap, sunglasses, and a 9mm automatic. Guess what, boys and girls? We finished the book! We're done with Bizarre Colorado and the legacy of unusual people and events. On that note, you guys, we do have to go to our second music break. On this break, we have Mr. Britt Casey with Mr. Salmon. We have My Life by Mocha T. We have Mystique with Time for School. And we have Britt Casey with Main Thing. You guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this music break.
Hello? I'm trying to call my baby, but it's poor reception, cause she ain't picking up. Hello? Hello? Listen, Mr. Operator, I've been up all day and I'm trying to dial my baby's number. See, it only rings straight to the machine. 617. Now I know something must be wrong with this cell phone, cause my baby knows she wouldn't hang up on me. So tell me what's going on. I see, most of the time phone only ring twice. How you doing, boo? Cool, how's your date? Nice. Now she ain't picking up, plus a text her. Put it to your plane, she's the one to get next to. It's not just the way, it's all day with affection. I'm hoping this detection is poor reception. Straight to the machine, mean it's like clicking my car, get connected quick. I'm saying, hey, Mr. Cellular Phone Man, I see there's something wrong with my line. I try to dial my baby's number, but get click every time. Mr. Cellular Phone Man, I see there's something wrong with my line. I try to dial my baby's number, but get click every time. Why she ain't picking up, yo? I see the phone rings quite a few times before any answer. And I know she's home, well, at least till 3. And I know she's home. Now I don't mean to be any bother operator, but could you just check and connect this call for me? Cause I know she's on. Let's see, the first time I call, I'm like, maybe she working. And the second time I call, I'm like, little bit hurting. But the third time I call, I'm like, going berserk. And now half a day gone, can't get her on the horn. Usually in the morning, maybe it's something wrong. I mean, she wouldn't take this long to call back. See, we tight like that, she's supposed to be mine. So could you please try it one more time? Hey, Mr. Cellular Phone Man, I see there's something wrong with my line. I try to dial my baby's number, but get click every time. Mr. Cellular Phone Man, I see there's something wrong with my line. I try to dial my baby's number, but get click every time. Why she ain't picking up, yo? For some reason, it's like she ain't home. Just wanna get my baby on the phone. Now I know that she's there all alone. So can you please hook up my cellular phone? Hey, Mr. Cellular Phone Man, I see there's something wrong with my line. I try to dial my baby's number, but get click every time. Mr. Cellular Phone Man, I see something wrong with my line. I try to dial my baby's number, but get click every time. Mr. Cellular Phone Man, I see there's something wrong with my line. I try to dial my baby's number, but get click every time. Mr. Cellular me something wrong with my line. I jot down my baby's number, but get click every time. Why she ain't picking up, yo? Why she ain't picking up, yo?
Life, the quality or state of being alive, a living organism, and I am. Mocha tea, let's get it. My life, the sugar, honey, iced tea. They wonder why I smile so gracefully, and wonder why I like blue when I'm lactose. 10 toes, 10 fingers, nigga, 10 hoes. Flow dope, whip it, microwave and stove was broke. Broke days, broke weeks, even broke months. A rich don't will have them going crazy. Lettuce and mac and cheese got them going crazy. Irregular, abnormal, and unusual. So unusual, I got shot for being beautiful. You can tell me love, you so gorgeous, but yet got a gun pointing to my forehead. Yo, head break bread, yeah, we gon' feast. Remember the cold nights we had nothing to eat. Southern Belle raising hell area near you. I'm hungry and leaving no proof. My life, my life, my life. It ain't always sunshine in my life. A big puzzle, I'm trying to figure peace ain't right. They thought I wasn't gonna make it, I know they didn't. It's visual, check your vision if you got the issue. A news feed if you got the memo. Breaking news, a new wave coming. Fuck a wave, hurricane, so mocha-licious. I really do this, it's in my blood. Pass it to my kids when I have some. And that's hip-hop.
Do you believe? Are you ready? It's time for school. Roll out your red carpet. You gotta love to learn and have fun. It's time for school.
Do you believe? Are you ready? Get ready. It's time for school. Roll out your red carpet. You got to love to learn and have fun. It's time for school.
The funniest memory that I could recall is getting up to sharpen my pencil as a kid, showing off my new outfit from head to toe. Yo, I love the life of 3 9-year-olds with hyper goals. My mind be blown. Don't get upset when the answer's wrong. Pray for strength and you'll survive to be strong. I am a teacher, it's how I define myself. Help me vibe so well, don't stress. Do your best and forget the rest. Mama made sure we pray to God, highly blessed. And I am honored, no weapon formed against us should prosper. Don't ever forget. And I bet when you enter into school, you'll feel ultimate. No consequences of your accomplishments. Move away from the negativity, it got you bit. And if you getting in the midst, just take the time and repent. Stay focused, get a pencil, write about the lesson. Raise your righteous hand, find the answer to questions. Here be your main plan, leave a saucy impression. You are your own fan, you got this, is what I recommend. Do you believe? Are you ready? It's time for school. Roll out your red carpet. You gotta love to learn and have fun. It's time for school.
Do you believe? Are you ready? It's time for school. Roll out your red carpet. You got to love to learn and have fun. It's time for school. Back then, I loved school. I was cool. I was putting in my dues. I ain't wanna be no fool. Mama had a poppin', school supplies and shopping. Success was an option. Man had me locked in, but English was my topic. Lunchtime I had it rocking. Lunch tables was knocking, and we wasn't stopping. In gym, I was good from the 3. Like Stockton, music class, I had everyone stuck. They was watching. We wore the bow straps with retros and the watches. Love life, humble yourself. That's my creed. Think with your mind and heart, you will achieve. Pray on it, give it to God and proceed. Your goals, ambition, and God is all you need. Imagination and will is something we can't teach. Remember Dr. King, he had a whole dream. You can do whatever you want. I believe.
Do you believe? Do you believe? Are you ready? Are you ready? It's time for school. Roll out your red carpet. You gotta love to learn and have fun. It's time for school.
Do you believe? Are you ready? It's time for school. Roll out your red carpet. You got to love to learn and have fun. It's time for school.
Do you believe? Are you ready? It's time for school. Roll out your red carpet. Yeah, you gotta learn to love to have fun. It's time for school. Roll out your red carpet. Yeah.
I like it when you pop it, drop it, swing. Nah, don't stop it, doing that thing. Go, go, girl, keep doing that thing. I just wanna make you my main thing. Keep going, baby, now don't you stop that. Vanilla chocolate flavored, you're the only one that I'm searching for. You the one for me and I can't complain. You sunshine anytime it rain. Not around then I might go insane. I just wanna make you my main thing. I like it when you pop that, drop that. Keep going, baby, now don't you stop that. Honey, you're so sweet, I can't ignore. Thinking about you both more and more. Making it pop and drop and swing. I could be the king, you my queen. Yeah, you look good, but you I'm saying. I just wanna make you my main thing. I like it when you pop that, drop that. Keep going, baby, now don't you stop that. Who's them dudes in the back with the black on? True deep, don't sleep or slack on. Come to the money, honey, I'ma get a stack on. Excuse me, ma, can I get my Mac on? To the left, throw it to the right. Do it like you wanna do it to me all night. From the block, kid know how to act hard. Like brick house, women with a fat backyard. In the club with me and my man's illin' that. In the back door with me and my man chillin' that. I'm on the floor, I'm like, damn, she killin' that. It's going down, no cop around, feelin' that. I'm fly, I'm a guy that'll get him. Player like me, need two of you with him. Call you a lollipop and I wanna lick up you. Number one, my top choice of pick. Yo, give it to me, mom. Go, go, girl. Nah, don't stop. Oh, no, girl. Break it down for me, get it gone. Can you keep it going? On and on and on. Now give it to me, mom. Go, go, girl. Nah, don't stop. Oh, no, girl. Hey, break it down for me, get it gone. Cause you got it going on and on and on. Can't deny, boo, that you too fly. Anytime that I look you in the eye, a phenomenon that I can't explain. Like the things you're doing to my brain. You the only one to take away my pain. I just wanna make you my main thing. I like it when you pop that, drop that. Keep going, baby, now don't you stop that. Can't stop thinking about how you move and all the things that I'ma do to you. True, this might be a little bit strange. Don't care if I don't even know your name. That's why I wanna tell you this simple and plain. I just wanna make you my main thing. I like it when you pop that, drop that. Keep going, baby, now don't you stop that. Who's them chicks all thick with the pumps on? Lumps in the front, back with the bumps on. Not a cat hoping that he get his humps on. I'm way beyond with them other chumps on. Sweet enough to eat and he might bite you. Wanna make love to you, I don't wanna fight you. Not a body like you, not a one like you. When you come around, no telling what he might do. Right now in the club, who the dawn? Want a man that got it going on later on. I could tell by the dancing, you digging this song. You can tell I've been digging you all night long. And I love to be digging in you all night long. Party right here, hottie all night long. Let's flex it to the coat check, exit to the Lexus. Nexus, triple exit. Come on, give it to me, ma. Go, girl. Now don't stop. Oh, no, girl. Break it down for me. Get it gone. Can you keep it going? On and on and on. Now give it to me, ma. Go, girl. Now don't stop. Oh, no, girl. Hey, break it down for me. Get it gone. Cause you got it going on and on and on. I like it when you pop it, drop it, swing. Now don't stop it, doing that thing. Go, girl, keep doing that thing. I just wanna make you my main thing. You pop it, drop it, swing. Now don't stop it, doing that thing. Go, girl, keep doing that thing. I just wanna make you my main thing. Vanilla chocolate flavored, you're the only one that I'm searching for. You the one for me and I can't complain. You sunshine anytime it rain. Not around then I might go insane. I just wanna make you my main thing. I like it when you pop that, drop that. Keep going, baby, now don't you stop that. Honey, you so sweet, I can't ignore. Thinking about you both more and more. Making it pop and drop and swing. I could be the canyon, you my queen. Yeah, they look good, but you I'm saying. I just wanna make you my main thing. I like it when you pop that, drop that. Keep going, baby, now don't you stop that. Cannot believe that you too fly. Anytime that I look you in the eye, a phenomenon that I can't explain. Like the things you're doing to my brain. You the only one to take away my pain. I just wanna make you my main thing. I like it when you pop that, drop that. Keep going, baby, now don't you stop that. Can't stop thinking about how you move and all the things that I'ma do to you. True, this might be a little bit strange. Don't care if I don't even know your name. That's why I wanna tell you this simple and plain. I just wanna make you my main thing. I like it when you pop that, drop that. Keep going, baby, now don't you stop that.
Oh, that was Mr. Brick Casey with Main Thing and Mr. Cellphone Man. So, I hope you guys all sitting around the campfire at this point. You're roasting your s'mores. If you're not down with s'mores, maybe you're having some hot cocoa with some marshmallows, maybe a side of graham crackers. You know, we can make s'mores different ways. We can get that flavor accumulation going on. But it's about time for some ghost stories. What do you think? So I did enjoy that book, Bizarre Colorado, by Mr. I think it's Stephen Jessen. No, Kenneth Jessen. Jessen, not Jensen. I'm thinking Supernatural Jensen. But yeah, it was a very good book. I really enjoyed it. But it's in the past now. So thank you, Mr. Kenneth Jessen, for your admirable work with Bizarre Colorado, because I, for one, did enjoy myself reading these stories. So, we're going to go to this article I found in Outside Magazine. Two of these stories I've saved for tomorrow night's show. So tonight, I'll be, I almost said singing, reading the story of The Ghost of La Parva Ski Resort. And the storyteller of this story is Mr. Drew Tapke, and he is a professional skier. So throughout Latin America, you'll hear variations of the story of La Llorona, or the Wailing Woman. Sometimes she's lost her husband. Sometimes she's lost her children. Sometimes it's both. But in La Parva, a ski spot in the Chilean Andes, the Wailing Woman is named Lola. And I don't know, was she a showgirl? I guess we'll have to read on and see. Everyone in the area swears they knew her before she died. A local restaurant owner said he dated her. Pro skier Drew Tapke says, adding that the ski patroller he heard the story from pointed at the exact hut where this tale takes place. The story starts on a nice day in peak ski season. Lola and her young son plan to spend the day on the slopes. As can happen in the Andes, a thick fog rose up from the valley, which often precedes the arrival of a real storm. The clouds enveloped the two as they were making their way down from the top of the mountain, and they lost contact with one another, Tapke says. Desperate to find her son, Lola began screaming his name as she ran through the thick fog. Unable to see clearly, though, she stumbled down a steep slope and began sliding toward a rocky couloir. By chance, a local lift operator who was returning to his cabin came across her body. He was afraid she was dead, but on closer inspection, he found she was still alive, just barely, Tabke says. Her body was covered in lacerations from sharp rocks, and the only word she said, in the faintest whisper, was her son's name. The lift operator worked to carefully pull her body to his cabin, which was just up the hill. He bandaged her head, her cuts, as best he could, and then ran to fetch the doctor. Together, the doctor and the lift operator made their way back to his hut, the fog hanging thickly in the air. When they arrived, though, the bed was empty, just the bloody sheets remained. Neither the woman nor her son were ever found, Tabke says, but locals report hearing her wail for her child whenever they're near that lift operator's cabin. And here's the thing. Tabke does not believe in ghosts. Something, however, changes when he arrives in Chile each winter. Maybe it's the fact that from La Parva you can see up Cerro El Plomo, an Incan child sacrifice site. Maybe it's because Tabke has simply read so many magical realism books by authors like Juan Rulfo and Gabriel Garcia Marquez. But sitting alone in his cabin in the Andes with the wind whipping and candles flickering, he swears that every now and then he just can't tell if what he's hearing is a woman or the wind. I've heard stories of the wind making weird noises. It could be the way that it's coming through shingles or different cracks in the building or whatnot, but it can be very, very eerie. So this next one is called Paranormal Experiences at My Ranch. I swear on my family it's true. And this comes from the site on Reddit, which is GhostStories. And I believe that the person that wrote this was HKO Papa Kalash 69. So, my grandpa has this ranch about 25 miles east of Payson, Arizona. For those in Arizona, it's between Hagler Creek and the 260. It's very secluded, but the land is good for grazing. I spent a lot of time running Jersey cattle on the range. Every night, one of us rides out to check on the cattle in the field and to check fence line for holes in the wire. A few days ago, I was riding out to check on the herd at about 1:30 a.m., and I kept hearing rustling in the tree line running along the fence perimeter. Figured it was coyotes or squirrels. I see a lot of them up there, and it went away every 10 to 15 minutes, and then I could hear it again. The second time I heard it, I was off my horse and walking him to a little water trough. The cows were about 150 to 200 yards away, just within my view with the moonlight. I heard the rustling again, but this time it was heavy. Me and my horse Vegas both looked up at the same time, wondering what the fuck we were hearing. At this point, I came to the eerie realization that whatever was out there was tracking me in Vegas. Didn't seem so interested in the cows. So, in an attempt to scare it off, I got back on my horse and grabbed my whip and uncoiled it. I don't use it on animals, I only use it to make a loud noise to move cattle. And I cracked it a few times rather than using my pistol. The rustling stopped and the forest was dead quiet once more. Not thinking much about it, I went back to count the head. I marked 38 heads, all the cows were there. So I started my way back to the house. I was about 3.5 miles away. It's a bit of a trail ride to get back. It was about 10 minutes of silence until I heard the rustling again. At this point, I was getting pissed. I figured it was some little dumbass coyote thinking we were going to lead him somewhere, so I called my grandpa on the radio. There's zero service out there whatsoever, and I told him I was going to fire my gun so he didn't get worried. So I reached down and pulled my revolver from my side. For all you guys who like firearms, this Uberti replica Colt 45 Peacemaker chambered 45 Colt, and I fired one round into the air. The rustling stopped, As the shot rang out through the woods and mountains, my ears rang and the smell of gunpowder filled my nose as the smoke settled. After I calmed Vegas down, I started riding back only for the rustling to come back 5 minutes later. I started getting really nervous at this point because usually coyotes run away when they get scared by a loud noise. I didn't have a flashlight on me because I'm dumb and I forgot, so I used my lame-ass iPhone flashlight and dismounted. I slowly walked to the tree line where I heard the rustling as I had my gun out, ready for an animal to jump at me or something. I flashed my light around through clearings in the trees, and to my right I heard rustling about 100 feet away, and turned over. To my surprise and confusion, I saw a black silhouette of a horse run across the trail. I immediately thought, shit, is that one of our horses? Is that someone else's horse? So I rode over to where I saw the horse. Shaking with anxiety, I looked and was confused to how a horse even ran out of and into the forest because it was so thick with shrubbery. And when I looked back behind me to start riding back, I stopped frozen in fear as I got the chills. I dropped my gun and heard the sound of it hit the ground and echo through the woods, because in front of me, about 50 feet away, was a silhouette of a man wearing a flat-brimmed hat and appeared to have chaps on. I picked up my gun and aimed at the figure, and it was gone. I got back on Vegas and rode like the wind to get out of there, constantly looking behind me in fear of it following me home. I made it back and told my grandpa. He was trying to calm me down and said he's had some weird experiences too. If you made it to the end of this story, thank you. And if anyone knows what I could have encountered, let me know. Alright, so I'm just looking for another story here. This one is called Something Has Haunted My Family for Years, which caused Ed and Lorraine Warren to visit my mother in college, but we are still being haunted to this day. And this is by KG Power, and again on the Ghost Stories site, on Reddit. My mother went to Eastern Washington University and stayed in one of the houses the locals rented out to college students. I cannot give the exact age of the house, but it was old enough to have a built-in button on the floor that would call up the servants in the attic, so the house was relatively old. During her studies there, she had 3 different roommates. My uncle was the first, who then was replaced by my mother's best friend, who was replaced by my father. All 3 of them can confirm strange happenings in this house and be woken up in the middle of the night with people whispering. The worst of it was in my mother's room and the attic. My mother hated that house, but she didn't have anywhere else to live, and the dorms were expensive, so she sucked it up and lived there until she graduated. She hated sleeping alone. The air in her room constantly felt thick and heavy. Her closet was constantly freezing cold, and at night she would hear multiple people whispering incoherent words all at once. While living there, my mother had a cat named Puss, who would constantly hide under the bed. One time my mother caught Puss out from under her bed, sitting, watching, and growling at one of the corners of the room. My mother went over to Puss, confused at what she was looking at, until she saw a black figure in the corner slowly start to move upwards towards the ceiling. Puss started to become aggressive, her hissing and growling getting louder before she freaked out and shot off back under the bed, still growling at the corner until the black figure was gone. My mother had never seen Puss act like this, since Puss was usually a very loving and happy cat, but whatever that was clearly terrified her. Sometime later, my mother was talking with a friend who was excited to be touring 2 famous paranormal investigators around the college and town, showing them supposed haunted places. My mother brought up the fact that she was always having weird stuff happen at her house and thinks it may be haunted. Her friend got excited and begged her to let him bring them to her house. My mother refused since she wasn't willing to stay up late for some people that she doesn't even know. My mother didn't know at the time who these investigators were since she never really kept up with paranormal stuff, believing it can let evil into your life. She only knew that they were on quite a few popular talk shows at the time. These two investigators were Ed and Lorraine Warren. Around midnight, my mother's best friend comes to her and tells her that there are people at the door wanting to speak to her. Confused, my mother got in a robe and went to the front door. There she saw her tour guide friend with 12 other students behind Ed and Lorraine Warren. Lorraine asked my mother if they could come in as their guide told them that it is possible her house is haunted. My mother agreed and let them all in. Lorraine asked my mother where in the house is the haunting more active, and my mother told her that it was in her bedroom and that she would take Ed and Lorraine there, but everyone else had to wait here. They agreed, and my mother took Ed and Lorraine to her room. When my mother entered her room, she sat on her bed and asked if they could feel it, how heavy the air was. Ed and Lorraine agreed that the air was heavy, like how some of the haunted places they have been to. Lorraine walked around the room, then to the closet, and asked if she could hear voices here. My mother broke down crying and said she could hear them every night and that it kept her up at night. Lorraine told her that it was possible that her closet is a doorway for those who passed on or a doorway to hell. My mother continued to cry before Lorraine came over to her and told her that the reason this stuff is happening to her is because of her mom's family, that the women have some connection with those beyond, and that it's possible that they are psychic, which makes the dead attracted to her. My mother then told Lorraine about the black figure, which Lorraine told her that wasn't from this house but was connected to her family, mainly her dad's side, and that it most likely went after her grandfather, her father, and now her. The figure isn't a ghost or a demon but something pure evil, and that it wants her. Fearful, my mother asked them if they could bless her home and her room, which they did, and after further investigation, the whole house. Ed and Lorraine told her that her house was the first place that actually showed activity and signs of haunting in the whole area. After they finished the blessing, the house, Ed and Lorraine left. Time passed and my mom's best friend moved out and my dad moved in. The activity in the house still continued even after the blessing. At first, my father was skeptical of the house being haunted until one night while sleeping in my mom's bed, he heard the whispering. He asked my mother what she said, and she told him she didn't say anything. After a few moments of silence between them, she asked if he could hear them. Confused, my father asked what she was talking about, and she told him the whispering. He then agreed that she heard the whispering and asked where it was coming from, which she then told her it was in the closet, and it happens every night. Sometime after, my father got curious about whether or not the servants button still worked. Originally, no one had ever been up into the attic. Both of my parents made their way up to the attic but never reached the top, since on their way there, both of my parents felt like they couldn't breathe as the temperatures dropped to the freezings, and my mother started to panic as she felt like she was being choked. She quickly told my father, "Turn back around," because it felt as though they were not wanted up there. Not wanting to upset my mother more, my father agreed and turned back around, never to go up there again. Once my mother graduated college, they moved out of the house, and the strange events continued to happen no matter where they moved. Around the time I was born, my parents lived in a rather small house with my two older brothers. Constantly, our cats would freak out, growling and hissing at the corners of the house. Not only that, but my mother would constantly see this black figure around the house. Later, my family had our house constructed and we moved out of our old one. These strange events followed us and got worse. One day, when I was around 5, I was walking outside my room to walk downstairs. The moment I walked to the balcony, I felt someone grab my arm extremely rough. I turn around and I see a black figure holding my arm. I scream for my mother. My mother came running upstairs and she sees the black figure. She grabs my arm and tries to pull me away, but the figure will not let me go. She pulled as hard as she could and ripped me away from the black figure. As she does, the figure disappears and a giant hand mark is left on my arm. My mother runs downstairs and screams at my father to get my brothers and that they are leaving the house until it is blessed. We later had a priest come to our house and bless it. Afterward, the activity stopped, but growing up, me and my second older brother would constantly have nightmares of this figure in our dreams doing awful things to us, but it had bright red eyes and would chase us. Nothing else has happened since then, and I still live in the house, but every once in a while I get this sudden fear from the staircase. I never go downstairs at night without the lights on out of fear of this thing that is possibly still here. I had spoken to my mother about the dreams and stuff that happened to her, but she tries to avoid talking about it since she believes the more we talk about it, the more it could come back. She has told me, though, that she spoke with my grandfather about this figure who refused to talk much about it since the first time she brought it up, he went pale as a ghost. He said that the figure used to torment him as a child, and his dad would tell him about the figure and how it would come for him as it did with me. My mother didn't realize that it was Ed and Lorraine Warren until we were watching a documentary about them, and she points out that they were the ones who came to her house. I was speechless, and she was confused as I told her that they were the Ed and Lorraine Warren, the most famous paranormal investigators, that they were the ones who started publicly doing paranormal investigations, and there are famous horror movies that involve them. My mother freaks out and tells my father about it, and while my father was shocked, he didn't think much of it. I apologize if my story is a little all over the place, but this was the best attempt to explain my mother's story and my experience, since my mother doesn't like to talk about it much out of fear. And it says that this was edited to fix some spelling errors, which happens when you're telling a story or writing a story. Yeah, all kinds of things can happen as your mind is rushing and you're trying to write it down. There was one about a Ouija board, but it's more of a question than a story. So this one's called Creepy Stories I've Experienced So Far. And this is found on Reddit under Ghost Stories. And the person that is writing the story is known as 32199TCF. Years ago, my parents revealed some chilling stories of ghosts or happenings they've been through. About a year after I was born, my parents settled down in a cozy little old cabin in town, which was pretty ancient by their descriptions of it. They said almost immediately, strange, unexplained things seemed to happen. I'd be laughing, staring at corners with no one in the room with me, or they'd walk in on me staring at the doorway listening to what seemed like nothing. But it was like I was listening to something speaking to me. The hardest thing, I guess, would be hard to believe was the time they were watching TV, when out of nowhere I started laughing at something outside. So they thought maybe someone was out there. When they checked, there was nothing, just the clothesline out back. Then with nothing in sight, they heard the clothesline snap, then vibrate visibly, like someone pulling the line, then letting go. When it happened again, I'd start laughing. They didn't know what to think, but to just close the door and blame the wind. Another time was around 11 to 12 years ago at the last house we lived in as a family. My mother told me this story around the time it happened to her. I remember that night. My aunt and cousin were staying with us at the time. My sisters were pretty tiny around then too. They were in bed with my mom that night. My dad was working late, so he wasn't home. Mom said she was having a hard time going to sleep with a lot on her mind. My sisters sprawled all over the bed didn't help, but when she did doze off, it was interrupted by one of my sisters crying. In order to check what was bugging her, my mom sat up thinking she was probably having a bad dream. What she saw when she opened her eyes, she said, gave her a chill down her spine. There was a small, pitch-black shadow-like creature over my sister. It probably noticed my mom waking up and darted off the bed and down the hall without making a sound. She immediately started praying and rushed out after it. She searched the house thinking it might have been a small animal, but didn't turn up anything. She said whatever it was big enough to not be a mouse or rat. Our dog was outside and we didn't have any cats. It still gives her chills to talk about it. She just refers to it as a demon when telling the story. This one is found on Reddit, Ghost Stories. And the author of this story is Cincy824. The title, one of many experiences growing up in a 300-year-old colonial house near Philadelphia. I would like to share a personal experience that I had in my childhood home in the early 90s when I was 6 years old. This isn't the first experience, and it definitely wasn't the last, but it is the only time I ever truly saw her. A quick backstory. The house is a brick colonial built by one of the very first families to settle outside of Philadelphia. They were a very affluent family who owned a large portion of land in the area and worked in the city. The house was lived in by descendants well into the early 1900s, so as you can imagine, a lot of history, births, and deaths going on within those walls. As a child, I suffered from nightmares, a lot of them. It was commonplace for me to wake up in the middle of the night, jarred awake by some terrifying dream, and this time was no different. On this particular night, I had awoken from a scary dream, and in order to calm myself down, I laid quietly in my bed and scanned the dark corners in my bedroom for some unknown threat. I have no idea what I expected to find, but I definitely remember the feeling of what could be hiding here in the shadows. As I looked around, nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary at first, but then all of a sudden, there she was, standing in my doorway, staring directly at me. Her face was emotionless. She was very beautiful, with shoulder-length brown hair that had large waves towards the bottom, and she was wearing a long white nightgown. Forgive me for the cliché, but that is what she was wearing. I stared at her in shock and confusion, and she just stared back. I didn't understand what was happening, but what I did know was that there was a woman in my house in the middle of the night whom I did not recognize, and she was looking right into my eyes. She was clear as day, as if somebody was just standing there, watching over their child as they slept. The wheels in my head were turning, and all I could come up with was, this person should not be here. The next thing I remember doing was throwing the covers over my head with my heart racing and thinking over and over, please go away. I have no idea how long I hid under the covers, but when I emerged, she was gone. From what my mother tells me, I didn't tell her right away what had happened. I think she said I told her a couple days later that I saw a woman in the house. From that point onwards, and even to this day, when I visit my parents, who still live there, you bet the door is shut. Friends ask me how on earth I could live there. The way I see it, her presence has never been malicious, and she lived there first, so it is just as much her house as it is mine if she chooses to stay. She does seem to have a sense of humor, though. I thought about saving that story for a different day, but it does directly correlate to the original, so I will add it if anyone is interested in a reading further. Fast forward to last summer. I was back home for a short time helping to run the family business, which is also on the same property in a separate building. The topic of hauntings came up with one of the employees I have grown close with. I told her that we have a resident ghost in the family home and told her the story I just told here. She jokingly said to remind her never to come over to visit. I reassured her that it wasn't that bad and that I personally hadn't experienced anything recently when I visit, and even made a joke that perhaps she had moved out. We laughed, and that was the end of it, or so I thought. That very same evening, I came downstairs to ask my mother something and found that I was alone in the house. The property is pretty large, so it is not uncommon to be around and not know where the person is. I went into the kitchen and found some almonds to snack on. Just then, I felt like someone was in the house. I figured it was my mom coming back in, and I checked around the corner, and there was no one. I called out to her and received no response. It was strange, but I shrugged it off and went back to snacking. I had my back to the entrance to the kitchen, and I was just sort of standing there, staring out the kitchen window, kind of daydreaming. That is when I felt it. Someone poked me on the back of my arm. It was a playful poke, the kind you do when you sneak up behind someone and tap them to get their attention. During the time it took me to turn around to see who was there, I remember wondering who it could possibly be. My parents are not people who sneak up behind others and poke them. Oh, laugh out loud. It was no one. No one was there. I fully expected someone to be standing there. So when there wasn't, I was so taken aback that I let out a startled yell and power walked straight for the front door and left the house. The feeling I had was like reality slapped me in the face. I am completely convinced it was her, giving me a playful nudge saying, "Guess who is still here?" That really freaked me out. I can handle little things here and there, but being physically touched, no thank you. Anyway, that is all for today, and thanks for listening. Strange things in a new apartment that was previously a vacant lot. And this one is by Hedge Rooster 1. I have been sitting on this for 4 years. I know, because it happened when my daughter was a newborn, a few months old. Let me start with a skeptical person. I believe sometimes our minds premise when we hear a scary story and then shortly after we see or experience a scary story. Now, I also believe in paranormal. So it was a Sunday, and my spouse and I decided after putting our daughter to bed, we would spend some time together and play Minecraft together. And so we do just that. Our daughter to bed and play Minecraft together, during which our daughter awakes and in need of food. My wife goes to take care of her, and I had the strangest, creepiest feeling I had never experienced. Like some other presence was there. It was strong enough I paused the game. Note: my wife is not a fan of even the zombie sounds on Minecraft. Such when we play, it's in peaceful mode. No zombies, skeletons, or other mobs. So I note said feeling, but brushed it aside. The skeptic in me, my imagination, etc. I thought about asking my spouse when she came back, but again I brushed it aside, and just as I pushed the idea out, she asked, "You noticed anything strange while I was gone?" And I asked, "Strange how? Creepy?" I proceed to tell her my experience of the strange feeling, and she says, while she was tending to our daughter, she saw what she thought were shadows moving. Well, we stopped what we were doing and brought our daughter into our room and went to bed. Extra note: my spouse worked as a CNA at nursing homes and care facilities quite a bit, and she has had her own scary experiences, such she doesn't let horror movies or anything deemed scary play in our house. Someone said below, "I was so happy when you said you took the baby with you." It's amazing how many people just leave the baby in their room to let them hash it out. So this one is on Reddit, Ghost Stories, and the writer of this story is Exodia Chaos, and it's called A Little Girl and Shadow Ghosts. My first experience was with a little girl which was probably my age in our house. I was 10 that time. She was very playful. Her favorite spot is in my parents' bedroom under their bed. The first time I heard her was a psst calling around from the side of the room. So I went downstairs and asked my mom if she was calling me, but she was cooking in the kitchen. I always hear her doing that every time I'm in that room, and only realized at the third she was doing it. My most terrifying experience with her is when I was home alone watching cartoons. She whispered right in my ear, asking me with a playful voice, "What are you doing?" Like she was literally there beside me. I ran away as fast as I can and went outside. I didn't even look back because I know it's her. I didn't even get to wear my slippers, and it was so hot outside, but I endured that just to wait for my parents to come home. Thankfully, they didn't take that long. I haven't told anybody about this little girl in our hometown, not even my friends, but one of them said they saw a girl in our top window, and guess what? That window is where my parents' room is at. Now, my experiences with shadow ghosts, my first one was in my grandma's house. I was probably 12 or 13 years old. There are 3 rooms in that house, and the 2 rooms are faced to each other. My uncle also lives there with his family, which was on a vacation that time, so the other room was vacant. My grandma was outside shopping for groceries that time, and my grandpa was in his room, the one of the 3 rooms which is not facing each other. I was just playing on the laptop that time. I was playing a browser game called AQ Worlds, and I fucking saw a completely black human-like figure came out of my uncle's room. At first I thought it was a dog because it came out of that room walking on all 4s, but there was never a dog in that house. It was just completely black, only its eyes are different, which is very human-like, and it just looked at me. I cried that time, and I can't even go to my grandpa's room, but when I look back to where it was, it's just gone. They told me that I was probably just imagining things, but no, I saw it clearly, and its image is still burned in my brain. My last encounter, 2016, was with a shadow too. I was 16 in my room. I was sleeping that time, and then suddenly I could not breathe, and I was seeing a dark figure beside me. I even asked my mom for help with a faintly voice, but I couldn't because I was losing breath, and I tried hard to wake up until I realized that it wasn't just a bad dream, it was fucking real, because I was facing the same direction where I saw the black figure when I woke up, and after that an image of a black figure is inside my head. No matter what I think of, it's just there standing, and I was losing it. I actually thought it was trying to possess me. I struggled until I said in my head that whatever it is you want, I can't help you, I'm sorry, please. Because I was literally about to go crazy that time, as I couldn't take it anymore because I feel like I'm losing control over my consciousness, so I went real desperate. Thankfully, after that image in my head was gone, and it just didn't show up anymore, I didn't sleep that time in my room and asked my mom if I can sleep with them. This is all true experiences, and everything that I said was every detail that has happened. I could never forget all those times, as it still haunts me till this day. I am now 21, and I'm still scared as fuck. This has affected me so much that I have trouble sleeping sometimes, and sometimes I feel like something is just behind me. It made me really anxious. As much as I want to not believe in ghosts, I just can't deny that they're fucking real, and they can appear at any time. I just want to remove these memories from my head. Sometimes I tear up and shiver whenever I remember it. This story is called Ghost Stories on Reddit, and the writer is Copper12463, and the name of the story is The Hell is Going On Right Now. Last night I went to bed on my couch near midnight. I woke up because I saw a spirit in my dream. It told me to move. I woke and nah, I'm good. And then my head started throbbing. The blood pressure in my head went so far up I could feel it. And there was a pulsing sound in my ears. I just laid there with my eyes closed by my dog. It stopped after about 20 seconds, so I grabbed my shit and ran back to my room. When in there, I laid for a little bit, dozed off, and woke up again and was just like, that didn't happen, I'm losing it. And then it happened again, and I saw the spirit thing. My head still hurts from it. Isn't that interesting how sometimes these different entities can have effects or cause different reactions within your body? So this is found on Reddit under Ghost Stories, and the writer of this story is XX Nuke Mutant XX. Saw a shadow black dog. Last time I visited my family, I saw the shadow dog. I was staying at my mother's home, and she was out at a church meeting in the evening. I was chilling and had a view down the hallway leading to the rooms from the living room. I saw a shadow dog. It was pitch black and was a solid black dog figure. The dog walked out of my mother's room and into the guest room where I was staying. I knew what I saw, but I told myself it's probably one of her dogs. I went into the guest room and searched for a dog, in the closet, under the bed, everywhere. I could not find it and had to assume it was some form of aspiration. I wasn't too frightened because I didn't feel any ill intent. I can usually sense feelings of others, so I had no problem sleeping in the room that night. I do feel my family is haunted by other hauntings, but feel this was different. It's the only time I actually saw anything. I usually just sense a presence. Well, that's my story. Oh, I'll also mention that when at my brother's house, something grabbed a 1-liter pop bottle and threw it across his kitchen as we sat in the living room. I hope that was just my father getting pissed. We were drinking and smoking. Who knows, though? I was too drunk and numb to sense anything. Enjoy my story. So this one is also found on Reddit under Ghost Stories, and the writer of the story is different_formal6623. Spooky but amazing. Okay, so this experience was actually my mom's. When I was 9, about 24 years ago, my mom's older sister passed away very unexpectedly. She was only 35. It was also just a very tragic situation. Anyways, my grandparents, mom, and other aunt were devastated, and I remember it just being a very sad time. So fast forward to about a month to 6 weeks after her passing, we just moved into a new house, and all of this was going on while we were waiting on an autopsy report, cause of death, etc. So one night, my mom woke from a dead sleep and felt compelled to go down to the kitchen. As she turned the light on, to her absolute shock, there sat my Aunt Veronica on the bar stool at the kitchen counter. Mom said she looked just as she did in life, not ghostly or transparent or whatever. She told my mom she knew everyone was worried, and she apologized for how she left, but she said she had to go. She told my mom she was at peace and her passing was all for the best. Mom said she looked peaceful and happy. She told Mom she was going to wake up and not believe that this happened, so she was going to give her proof. She said we would be receiving a check for a large amount that we weren't expecting, and when she got the check, Mom would know that what happened was real and not a dream. Well, lo and behold, the next day, thinking that was all a dream, my mom ventured out to the mailbox, and inside was a tax credit check for a large amount, and in that moment she burst into tears. She was unequivocally knowing that what had happened the night before was real. This isn't the only time she has visited us since she passed. She comes to me in dreams every now and then. I actually keep her Bible on my nightstand, and every time I dream of her, I write it down on a piece of notebook paper folded up inside. I know that she is really visiting me. It's not just a dream. Like I said, the circumstances surrounding her death were very tragic. I will mention that our entire family was under the impression that she had died of a heart attack. She did have pre-existing heart conditions. But it wasn't until my granddad passed away in 2020 that we saw the actual autopsy report. My aunt actually committed suicide by taking 30 prescription pills all at the same time. This is something my grandparents carried with them all those years and never revealed that to my mom, her sister, or anyone else. I think the actual cause of her death is the reason why she visits so often. I assume there's a lot of guilt she has about how she chose to go about her death. Either way, my aunt was the most wonderful person. She never had kids or a husband. We honestly talk about and think about her every day, even all these years later. This is one of just many memorable accounts with her following her death, and since my grandmother and grandmother have passed, they accompany her now in our dreams. That is so cool. And I just want you guys to know that our loved ones who do pass, whether it's by suicide or traumatic death or of natural causes, it's when they come in the dream realm, that is the easiest way for them to come to us. And so it's really awesome to take note of that and be aware that this is a way for them to come through, to show up in real life, all the energy it takes. And I think there's a certain amount of knowing or learning on the other side where you can't just automatically, be this light-bearing ghost and you're able to talk in a tone where people can hear you. A lot of times when voices are recorded in real life, it is actually, as a whisper. So it's pretty intriguing when that happens. But I hope you guys are having a really, really awesome 4th of July weekend so far. I hope you enjoyed story time with me, TessaTNT. Thank you so much again for listening and hanging out with me and joining us tonight on Late Night in the Rockies. It was a pleasure having you. And thank you to all of our friends on We Are Paradox Media's Facebook, Spreaker, Twitter, Periscope, iHeartRadio, and wherever else you may be listening beyond the Omniverse tonight. I had a wonderful time this evening, and I can't wait to do it again. Tomorrow night we have Miss Psychic Medium Mia Savage on. We have Mr. Lynn Dorman on. And we're going to have Mr. Jason from Diecast Racers in. He's going to be on. You guys, don't forget, we are all in this together. Together we can make the world a little better. And together, my friends, we are Paradox Media, because without you, there is no us. Being it is 4th of July weekend, we may or may not have an after party. We'll just have to wait and see. If you want to join, just give us a call, 970-335-9596, or look me up, Tessa.N.Thomas30, and maybe we'll get you in for the next after party. I also want to take time to thank our sponsors, because I couldn't do it without you. I want to thank Mr. Jim Morris, Mr. Kevin McDougall, Mr. Dell Elson, and Miss Mia Savage, as well as our musical host, Mr. Roy Washington of Quest Nation and Prime Example. Without these guys, we couldn't do it. I just love doing this show, and I love spending this time with you guys where we can all feel safe as a community to share our feelings as far as paranormal experiences, and share our paranormal experiences and not feel judged or ridiculed. Make sure you guys check us out throughout the week. We got Jason Davenport on with Diecast in Racers. And yeah, you guys stay safe this weekend.